Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Wonderful Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku becomes Takami's child? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. If Izuku was honest, he never quite understood family. It seemed unnecessary, a group of people you're supposed to love and protect? Even if you continuously argue and can't stand being in their company? Izuku was better off on his own. He didn't need people dragging him down, prying into his business. He didn't need someone to tuck him in at night, to remind him to brush his teeth, to make his lunch and bug him about cutting his curls. He hadn't had someone to do that, as far as he could remember, so by default he didn't need one. Besides, he was quirkless, he'd been an outcast as far back as his memories go, he had to make himself bad, an outcast, so he wouldn't be made one against his will. The whole bully yourself so others didn't kinda thing. So, it stood to reason that at age 12, it made sense for him to be grabbing fistfuls of hair, fist clenching and causing his opponent's nose to bust in the worst cracking nose he'd ever heard. His victory was short-lived, the older and bigger kid getting a hit on his side, pushing the air from his lungs and flipping their positions. But you see, the thing about Izuku was that he was quick. Sharp reflexes that resembled one of a hawk's, and so in total only 3 attacks hit him, the fist pounding the floor continuously. He felt the blood burst from his nose after the hit, cartilage not shattered just yet, and the side of his bottom lip splitting, a bruise already forming where a chubby fist had landed on his cheek. Izuku squirmed slightly before bringing his knee up, grinning at the high-pitched squeal the older boy made when his particularly sensitive area between his legs took the blow, and launched them forward. He pressed his forearm against his throat, the older boy's hand clawing at his face. So Izuku bit down, blood coaxing his tongue. Hands grabbed the sides of his hoodie, wrenching Izuku off and forcing his back against the wet grass, the boy's lackeys deciding it was their turn to hive him a beating. They aimed more for his stomach and arms, their boss getting DOBs on Izuku's glorious features, and this time he struggled to keep the tears at bay. This, of course, egged him on and he latched onto one boy's legs, slamming harshly on the side of his knee and jabbing his fingers in his eyes as his knees buckled, shouldering into the other guy and slamming a hand against his kidney, narrowly missing a hit to his throat, and sagging to the ground once his attacker was done, breathing heavily. He caught the sound of sirens just a little too late, pushing his aching body up and darting towards them, the voice nagging at him. He knew it was a bad idea, but he was low on choices. Of course, they decided the best place to fight was in a cornered area of the park, so either he had to grow wings and fly over a wall, or use the police as an exit. As the car skid to a stop, he flung his yellow backpack on and pulled his hood up, sliding across the bonnet before the officers could get out and flying down an alley. He was stopped, however, when an officer, one he'd grown accustomed to in the recent years, with long limbs swipe his feet beneath him, quickly dragging his arms behind his back. For God's sake, Izuku, again? You know we wouldn't call you unless it was a last resort. But this boy, this is his last chance. Keigo nodded, reaching for the folder that was passed to him as the social worker sighed, signing something at the police station's desk and sharing a small conversation with the officer before he scurried. She looked exhausted, probably was. He'd received the call about the troubled Duckling nearly 12 hours ago, and she had most definitely been awake the entire time filling out paperwork. He'd spent the entire time setting up the spare bedroom and getting his home in order, also filling out paperwork. No, I'll do everything I can to help. He flicked through the file, noticing how little of normal things were documented, like medical history and schooling. What was a frequent thing were complaints and arrests. He closed it and looked at the worker. Is there a summary you could tell me for now? So I can read this at home, I don't want to keep the kid waiting. She nodded, breathing deeply and collecting herself. Keigo knew this was going to be a handful, the chances of him getting PTSD himself from hearing this were high. Of course. Izuku's been in care since he was 8, he was surrendered by his mother and upon further investigation, severe neglect was discovered. He only became my case after the 3rd replacement, and I have limited information about what happened exactly. All I am aware of it that they were persecuted for child endangerment, quirk discrimination, and child abuse. These homes were within a few months, and Izuku was 9 when he went through these court trials. That was a heavy load, and they both knew it. It was after these placements he grew a more rebellious attitude. It started off small, a few cases of disrespect and running away, but it's been within the last year he's become as unpredictable and implacable. Before you, I called every placement and they refused to take him. He's a sweet boy when he isn't putting his defense up. It peeks through sometimes, an intelligent kid with a big heart. He just doesn't understand that not everyone is out to harm him. Liking his lips, Keigo ruffled his wings and looked up at the sound of sarcasm. The words weren't directly heard, but the tone was enough to draw their attention. The social worker sighed. I found myself in this position a rather lot recently. Here he is. True to her word, a boy appeared down the hall. He looked rougher than the 12 years old, with his dark green hair color and the golden specks in his green eyes more frequent. He was skinny, hoodie and jeans hanging off his lanky form, a bruise blossoming on his cheek and dried blood flaking beneath his nose and corner of his lip. He was pushing against an officer, who nudged him forward with an unimpressed glare. When they stopped a small distance away, he gripped just a little tighter. I don't want to see you here again, kid. There's only so many chances I can give you. He scowled, eyes fluttering to the social worker. How you doin', Miss Noma? She shook her head, tapping on the back of her clipboard as she crossed her arms over it and on her chest. Izuku. Her warning was unheeded as Izuku rose his eyes to Keigo, raising his eyebrow as he smirked. Bag yourself a chicken? Did I interrupt a date? Could a lasted another 12 hours? The officer still. Behind him gave a huffed laugh, wiping his face and looking just as exhausted. Not if Detective T was here. Izuku shrugged, burying his hands in his pockets. Well, he's not. Noma tooted, catching his attention once again and diverting the conversation back on track. Keigo watched Izuku's smirk fall a little, fear cracking through the masked eyes, before his smirk quirked again. No, this is Keigo Takami. He's your new placement. This is your last chance, and he's going to make sure you dash. He wasn't listening, and Noma's voice hardened. Izuku, do you understand what happens if you are moved or detained again? Rolling his eyes, Izuku waved her words away and shrugged. There was a tightness, however, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Yeah, juvie and all that shit. Why don't we skip the middleman and leave the poor chicken with his sanity? The officer handed Izuku his bag and the boy frowned, weighing it and scowling. You fuckers took my spray paint. Izuku hissed, tugging on the hand pinching his ear and trying to detach it. The Birdman refused to let go, a stubborn grip as he pulled him up the driveway to a large, and Izuku meant large, house. Let go, you overgrown bird fucker. Hawks, or Keigo Fing Takami, turned and raised an eyebrow, daring Izuku almost. That would be a stupid thing to do. If I do, are you going to try and run again? Yes, he would. And the hero knew it. I thought so. Once we're inside, we're going to tend to those cuts and bruises, you're going to change and then we're going to sit down and discuss some ground rules. Once that's over, we'll order dinner and watch a movie. Izuku grit his teeth, pushing Keigo away once the door was shut and locked behind him. He wants to think he pushed him off, but they both knew the hero let him go, and crossed his arms. And why do you think I'm going to listen to you? Because I'm your guardian, as much as you hate it. I suppose it's better to know the rules and break them than to break them and not know them, Nothing worse than a surprise punishment. Izuku suppressed a shudder, eyes burning as his hands clenched in his pockets. I'm going to escape, bird brain. Keigo shook his head, toeing off his shoes. This isn't somewhere that needs escaping. Sneaking out is a different thing, but one you will also not be doing. Bet all the windows and doors are locked, the sharp knives are in a locked drawer and medicine cabinet locked. Keigo made it a few steps before opening a door and pulling on a hook, the light flickering on, and turning to Izuku with crossed arms. Yes, they are, but that is because of your previous actions. Now, you've got a choice, Izuku, but by the end of it you will be sat on this counter and I will be tending to your face. Izuku obviously chose wrong, two red feathers wrapping around his wrists and tugging him forwards before he could gain his bearings. Keigo lifted him up embarrassingly easily, sitting him on the counter with a strict order to stay. Izuku couldn't move if he wanted, the feathers warningly moving around his ankles. This is going to be a give and take situation, Duckling. How you act, I will respond. If you misbehave and cause trouble, I will be strict. If you become a straight A student, I'll be more lenient. The Greenette watched as the man collected things from a cupboard, rubbing his red ear and snapping his eyes to the mirror behind him, drawing away quickly. Occasionally, throughout the 30 seconds of collecting, Keigo would glance back at Izuku's unmoving form. Now, aside from the obvious, what is injured? The immediate defensiveness closed Izuku's lungs, and he sneered, crossing his arms and digging his nails through the material of his hoodie, raising one eyebrow slightly, a movement Keigo found familiarity from his own guardians. Wouldn't you like to know, nuggets for brains? Nodding, Keigo rummaged through his things and grabbed a cloth, waiting for the water to be warm before soaking and wringing it out, setting himself in front of Izuku. Yes, I would. And I advise you get all the names out your system before we talk about rules. Izuku pulled back when the rag went for his face, and Keigo withdrew, holding it out instead. Take a look if you want, but I'll need to wash your face so you don't aggravate any cuts. Slowly, Izuku took it, squeezing once before the corner of his lips tugged up. His arm reared back quickly, almost rehearsed, and shot forward in attempt to throw it. Keigo's arm jerked up, wrapped around his forearm and stopping the movement with a jolt, taking the cloth as the shock and fear wiped off his face and was replaced with masked anger. "Don't fing touch me." Keigo did release the boy, keeping leveling eyes on him. "No throwing things, that's one rule I'll say now. Are you ready for me to wipe your face?" Scowling, Izuku doesn't answer, and Keigo starts, not holding his face as he wipes off dirt and blood. He wondered how much actually belonged to Izuku. The boy remained relatively still as he disinfected. The lack of many winces made him worry slightly, and made sure none needed stitches. Izuku refused plasters, which this once Keigo would let slide. He had compromised a considerable amount in both their eyes. "Let me see those knuckles, and then you are going to take off your shirt so I can make sure you're not hiding anything." The knuckles were cleaned and disinfected quickly, and then they ran into their first real problem. Keigo gestured for the shirt and hoodie to be removed, and Izuku scowled, crossing his arms tight and defiance clear on his face. No. Keigo knew this was a bigger issue than just not wanting to. The kid had been abused and no doubt had scars he was not proud of. He nodded and cleaned the cloth. "Okay, one step at a time. Take off your hoodie and let me check your arms." The winged man probably wouldn't have been listened to if not for the pure exhaustion clouding Izuku's eyes. It was reasonable. He had spent the night and part of the day in a cell. Slowly, Izuku pulled the hoodie off, reluctantly holding his arms out, pointedly avoiding the mirror. Keigo got the cleaning the grazes on his elbows, ignoring the thin white lines going across the wrist, or the burn wound peeking from under his left-shouldered sleeve. He pulls back to gently tug at the stained shirt. "I'll leave a cloth and the disinfectant. If anything is bleeding, you tell me, got it?" A reluctant nod. "Good, I'll go start dinner." It had been almost a week since Keigo had brought Izuku into his care, and Izuku seemed to take the rules as a challenge. The hero was fair with his rules, the general and standard ones with a few extra added that were relevant to Izuku's previous convictions. He also made all the consequences clear. He steered clear of the word punishments, and made sure the kid understood under no circumstances was he going to get hurt. For now, he had limited the punishments to timeouts, supervision for so long or having his bedroom door open, but as soon as Izuku begins to use the laptop, phone and notebooks Keigo had brought in advance, he'd begin to lose them for PRDS of time. Although, the kid had received one spanking for breaking every plate and glass Keigo owned. Izuku had screamed and cursed as he was dragged over Keigo's knees, the 12-year-old promptly resuming a silence policy for 2 days. That first night Izuku had slept fine, but he knew deep down it was because Izuku knew the pattern. The first night was always the safest. But since then, Izuku had seemingly gotten worse and worse in terms of behavior. He had yet to make any outward attempts at escape, but Keigo had only hours before discovered a stash of plastic pins and plastic fork prongs he hadn't noticed had been snapped off, because Izuku had been removing the evidence. So, as he stood outside the flat, he couldn't help but keep an extra watch on the kid, fingers gripping his ear as a response to the reluctance he had shown. The door opened to reveal a scraggy-haired man with his chin dipped in his capture weapon, a small smile replacing the usual frown. "Yo, long time Dadzawa." The hobo-looking man rolled his eyes, knowing eyes flicking to Izuku, and the fingers pinched tightly around his ear. "Problem child." Keigo gave a laugh, nudging Izuku into the flat, releasing him with a warning. "Any misbehavior and you won't sit for a week." The 12-year-old shrugged, toeing off his shoes and tucking his hands in his hoodie pocket. "Try me birdie." Shoyuta raised an eyebrow, and Keigo shook his head softly. "Hitoshi?" Shoyuta nodded, pointing to a door with a small name tag on. Izuku sneered silently, and when he didn't get the message, was nudged gently. "Go on fledgling, behave." Scowling, he vanished into the room, and the winged man sunk into a seat. Hisashi slid a mug in front of him. "Birdie?" Keigo grimaced, sipping his tea mercifully. "It's progress." Shoyuta yawns, eyes flicking to his kid's door. "He reminds me of a certain birdie when he first started living here." Keigo choked on his drink, eyebrows rising. "Hang on. I was never that temperamental and self-destructive as M." Hisashi gave a light laugh, shaking his head. "No, you were. You didn't like having to stay here and rules once you were free. Sho used to have to shade you across the city at night." Chirping with an annoyed tone, he looked at the mug. "In my defense, you said I was free from the commission and then set out 100 rules." Shoyuta poured himself another coffee, stroking a kitten behind its ear before turning his eyes to him. "And how many rules have you set out for problem child?" A small grin. 100. The system chew you up and spit you out too? Izuku scowled, ignoring the boy and instead heading for the window, wiping his thumb over the lock. He'd broken one like this before, a long while ago, but he was sure he remembered how. If you buck it, I'll get grounded. Shrugging, Izuku hooked his fingers under the wood, using his fingertips to lift and jar the lock. That sounds like your problem. The boy gave a hum, leaning on the wall with his arms crossed as he watched Izuku work. You've done this before. Izuku really did not have time to waste. Once he tugged the window a third time, he grabbed the biro from his pocket, always keep a pen, and took it apart, using the tip and ink tube to poke into the hing the best he could. You don't look too fresh yourself. He could see the flinch from the corner of his eye, and the boy straightened slightly, the term making both their instincts tick. A scowl spread over the purple eyes. You can stay here and be a house pet all you want, but that's not really up my alley, so either help me or sit your butt down and forget you saw anything. He shrugged, eyes guarded even more, lips quirked down in a sympathetic scowl. Izuku hated it. Do you really think you can get far? Izuku smirked, turning around as the window opened, cold air blowing into the room. He dropped his pen in his pocket and let his fingers bounce in a language he hadn't used in years. Word gets around, especially word about a brainwashing quirk. Izuku let out a yelp as the back of his hoodie was grasped, body pulled off the floor with a jolt. The sound of flapping made his body tense, before lurching into a full thrash as he was lifted higher and higher, the food he'd been scavenging out the bin left on the floor far below. Fing, let me go. You bird fing weasel. Let me go. He was dropped, 5 foot onto the roof of a building. Having only a second to catch his bearings, Izuku rolled, pushing into standing and bursting into a run. The aim was to gain enough momentum to leap onto the next building. But the 2 feathers that caught his ankles and pulled them from under him said otherwise. He scarped his forearms on the gravel top as he fell onto them, grunting and flipping into his back in time to kick Keigo's stomach, snarling. One ankle was caught in Taloned hands. Let go dash. Izuku! The shout made his heart seize, body freezing as pure terror made his blood run cold. He hadn't realized he was hyperventilating until a hand appeared on his shoulder, and Izuku flipped. He screamed and yelled profanities, scratching at the arms that went for him and biting into flesh. He kicked and punched and grabbed as he was pulled up, pressed against a chest and forced to his knees with arms crossed over his chest, a heartbeat pressed on his back. He wasn't sure how long he was there, but as it died down he felt the gravel bite into the skin on his knees. Deep breaths, Duckling, you need to breathe or you'll pass out. And as it stood, when Izuku's vision began to blur, that was the better option. The pounding in Izuku's head was the first thing he noticed, the throbbing in his temples making the whimper rise in his dry throat. He pressed his palms into his eyes as he forced his aching body to sit, eyebrows furrowed. There was a bad feeling in his gut, but for the life of Hai, he couldn't ream. His body startled as the memory of being caught on the roof pulsed like the headache, eyes blowing wide as he looked around the room. The room in the new placement, Keigo. Sheet! He hissed, kicking the bedclothes off and looking down at the gray hoodie and shorts. He hadn't put them on. Which meant Keigo had changed him, which meant he saw the scars and sheet. There were bandages around his forearms, where he'd scraped the skin off his forearms, and one around his ankle where he'd sprained it before getting caught. Over the top, a red feather that hardened against his skin. He didn't dare touch it, although at this point Keigo knew Izuku was awake from his movement. Confirming this was a knock on the door, and as the handle turned, Izuku burst forward, plowing against the door and slamming it closed, sliding down and pressing his back against it. That was stupid, so stupid, but Izuku found himself acting on the twisting in his gut. Biting hard on his lip, Izuku waited for the door to be shoved open, for the shouting, the pain, the fighting, the "Okay, I'll stay this side for now. You're dehydrated though, you need to drink." Blinking in surprise, Izuku furrowed his eyebrows, biting causing a cut under his bottom lip to reopen. He looked at the blood on his finger for a second after touching it, taking a deep breath and forcing a scowl. "I don't fing need anything." There was a soft hummed laugh, and Keigo tapped on the wooden door once. "I know you don't like me, or trust me, Izuku, but believe me for this one. You are dehydrated. You are going to be given consequences for running away, but when you are ready, I'm going to leave a bottle of water and some dinner out here for you, get it when you want it. Once you are ready, come down." More confusion twisting Izuku's features, and he heard Keigo walking away. He didn't move from his position until his knees screamed in protest, slowly pushing away and standing with a crack to face the door. There was no way Keigo was doing this, it wasn't right. He was waiting for Izuku to open the door to attack, there was no doubt. Sighing in acceptance, Izuku squared his shoulders, preparing to not go down without a fight, and opened the door. He was met with a water bottle and a plate of chicken nuggets. Looking around wildly and feeling nauseous at the concept of not knowing anything for certain, Izuku gingerly took the items and dragged them into the room, shutting the door and grabbing the desk chair, jamming it under the handle. It wasn't the first time he had done it. In fact, he did it quite often when he wanted to left alone in the placement, and whilst it was never needed, it made Izuku feel safe. He knew that if Keigo wanted it, the chair would do nothing. It had never helped before. The water and food was gone within minutes, and Izuku waited hours, watching the door for anything until he couldn't handle it. The twisting in his gut churned and he removed the chair. He couldn't sit around any longer and wait for the punishment, and gripped the handle. Taking a deep breaths, he headed for the living room, and to Keigo. Izuku's head was still throbbing as he stepped into the kitchen, teeth gritting together in defiance as his eyes narrowed on Keigo. The winged hero was hunched over the table, half a nugget on a fork and chewing on the other half as he met Izuku's gaze. His wing twitched. With a mouth full, which was utterly disgusting, he smiled. "There's some water in the fridge and more nuggets on the counter." Crossing his arms and snarling, Izuku squared his shoulders. "You're not going to punish me." Raising an eyebrow, Keigo swallowed and let the fork hover around his mouth. "You're right, but you deserve a consequence." He took the bite, as if expecting Izuku to leave it at that. "Naive, ignorant, fool. Call it what you want, I don't deserve shit. I'm just going to escape, again, so leave me to it." Keigo realized the similarity between Izuku and a kitten scratching in fear. That led to a sigh, and putting his fork down, but had yet to stand up. The feather he had around Izuku's ankle sensed the tension throughout his leg. Izuku was preparing to turn and run, or fight. "You broke a rule, and that has consequences." Clenching his fists, Izuku let his features soften into a smirk and leant on the door frame, crossing one leg over the other. "Try me." Nodding, Keigo pushed to standing and gestured to the corner where a pillow was on the floor. "This was attempt 1 and a boundary pusher. You're going to sit in the corner for 12 minutes and then you're going to do the dishwasher." The first time Izuku moved was the second he sat, and Keigo pushed him back down. This happened a few times before Izuku sighed sharply and crossed his legs. It didn't last long, Keigo barely making it a foot away before he was forced to put the kid back in his place. That happened a few more times until Keigo made it out the door, realizing Izuku was simply trying to wind him up. Testing his patience and waiting for Keigo to snap. Of course, the kid had thought sneaking away would have worked. 2 feathers put him back this time. "UFING dodo. PSS off." Pinching his nose, Keigo restarted the timer. 12 minutes. Izuku didn't relent. It was reaching midnight, a full, agonizing 4 hours later, when the timer managed to beep. The boy slouched in the corner with his forehead pressed against the wall. Keigo waited a minute, watching the kid who hadn't noticed the timer. He looked childish. Soft. The scowl was gone and so had the tension in his shoulders. His eyes were half open, tears dampening his eyelashes and eyebrows furrowed, lips moving with a soft murmur. He was absently fiddling with the end of the bandage on his arm, fingers delicate. It was hard to believe this was the same kid. As Keigo listened closer, he realized it was him the kid was talking about, or more specifically Hawks. Going into deep detail about theories about his quirk and his latest crime statistics. Impressive information hardly available to the public, stuff the public didn't care about. He waited a little longer, watching Izuku sniffle slightly and press the heel of his hand against his eyes, looking at the bandages before sighing. His eyes were unguarded, green showing all shades in its weaves. Vulnerable. A child. Too broken for anyone to be, too self-dependent and scared for a human. A trapped bird, wings clipped and chain on his leg. Duckling. And like that, back was the delinquent. Green eyes snapped to him, void of any proof of the boy he had seen not moments before, and a scowl made his lip curl. "What the F, do you want?" Silently sighing, Keigo looked to the clock. "You can do the dishwasher in the morning. Head off to bed, tomorrow is therapy so make sure you actually go to sleep." Pushing to standing with tense actions, Izuku shook his head. "I'm not going therapy. That's not up to debate. Go to bed, we'll speak in the morning." Izuku hesitated for a second, green swallowing gold, before seeming to dampen. He sked in a breathe harshly, turning and storming the opposite way. But to say the least, in the week he'd been at the placement, Izuku had not learned the way around. He knew how to get to his kag room and to the bathroom, to the kitchen and to the door. In that order. So, in his storm and bleary eyes, he found himself lost. Stopping dead in a hallway, he looked to the side, specially a photo atop a bookcase. It had a smaller version of Keigo, a teenager by the looks of it, hooked in a hug by the blonde from the previous day and pulling the same amused frown as the dark-haired man. A family. That idea itself brought anguish to him. Anguish and jealousy. Apparently everyone, even the cocky, smug, son of a beach, Keigo, could have a family except him. Feeling his eyes burn, what was his deal with crying today? He burst into the nearest room and bathroom and locked the door, climbing into the bathtub and using it as a makeshift bed. It'd have to do for now, because Izuku would rather be caught dead than seen by Keigo whilst crying. Mama? Big green eyes flash in the dim lighting, the crack in his voice highlighting the dampness in his eyelashes. Because at 4 years old, Izuku realizes his family isn't like others. He had watched other mamas pick their children from school, hug their babies tight and ask about school. Papas ruffling their kids' hair and encouraging them to take nothing against school bullies. He'd seen the notes in his friends' lunchboxes, the artwork of food, the cool bags and boxes. He'd sat idly by, waiting for his mama or papa to walk through the office door when he'd got caught in a fight. They never did. His family wasn't like that. He walked home after school and got greeted by an acknowledged nod. His papa never touched him, never let Izuku near him, and scolded him for whining when he came home crying. No notes were left in the lunches Izuku made himself, the food simply, he was 4, he couldn't cook, and could barely reach the fridge. Never hugged. So, he asked for one. In defense of his mama, because Izuku believed he was in the wrong, he shouldn't have asked when she was so busy. He should have waited until she was finished reading, but he'd finished his chores and making tomorrow's lunch, and had gotten impatient. As the words left his mouth, he felt his throat constrict, the utter anger in her eyes enough to shut him down mid-sentence. Enough to send him to his room for the rest of the evening. Izuku never got that hug. He never blamed her, however, because Izuku's parents weren't bad, they just weren't ready. I said I'm not going. Keigo sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose and trying to think. He had found Izuku sleeping in the bath of his bathroom that morning, and woke him, leading the half-asleep boy to his room. Izuku was always more cooperative and more manageable half asleep. And apparently the bacon and eggs he cooked for breakfast had put Izuku in an extremely sour mood. He hadn't to know that was his mother's signature dish. So when he had urged Izuku to come and put his shoes on ready to go to therapy, the kid had lashed out. Which meant climbing onto the top of the fridge and crossing his arms. Izuku, the therapists have the whole day booked off, so we can go now or later. Either way, you are getting off that fridge and standing in the corner. It was surprising how effective that had been the previous night, and Keigo was determined to take full advantage. Green eyes snapped to the pillow still there, and his scowl deepened, not a surprise. I'm not going to therapy and I'm not sitting in the corner like a child. You are acting like one, Izuku. If I have to force you down, I will. Sneering, the kid leant forwards dangerously, eyes narrowed and a cocky smirk on his face. He knew what Izuku was doing. Driving Keigo to the point where he could call the abuse card and get relocated. To juvie. I don't think you can, because you're just standing there like an idiot. Aren't you needed on Sesame Street soon? Can't keep the kiddies waiting. His eyebrow raised, further antagonizing the hero. His bait didn't get bit. Instead, Keigo kept his composure soft and let his wings ruffle a little, hiding the action of two falling free behind clumsiness. Please get down from the fridge, this is your last chance. Green eyes noticed the red feathers immediately, shuffling further back and pressing his heels into the door, pushing it open and letting a challenge settle in the air. Try me. The feathers stopped, but it didn't seem good enough. A foot hooked around the bottom tray. Izuku, don't you even dare. Smirking, his pulled his foot out quickly, pulling the tray out and letting it clatter to the ground with a clash, food falling with soft thumps besides it. The carton of orange fell, opening and letting the liquid spread across the floor. Keigo forced more authority into his voice, matching Izuku's glare with a firm look. You are going to get down, safely, and then you're going to clean this mess up, sit in the corner and then we are going. If I have to force you, you are going to have harsher consequences. Smirking and hooking his foot around the next tray, Izuku tilted his head to the side. Keigo reminded him this was a defense mechanism, and whilst one he was going to nib in the bud very quickly, a trauma response no doubt. Oh really? You think all that is scary? Big bird. No, I in no means wish to frighten you, Keigo started, sending 2 more feathers out the way and out of sight, but you need DSPLN. You know right from wrong, I know you do, but dash. Izuku cut in, voice venomous and the end shaking a little. You don't know sheet. You think just because you're a hero and my new placement that you know everything? You're not different. You can act almighty and good but eventually you'll end up the same. Before Keigo could say anything, Izuku launched off the fridge and around the island, evading Keigo efficiently, in his mind. As fingers curled around Izuku's bicep, a cold feeling spread throughout his body. He'd been caught. Izuku rubbed harsher at his face, trying to dispel the dampness in his lashes and make the redness the result of that, not the embarrassment and tears they were truly from. He shuffled slightly where he sat in the back seat, trying not to take note of the seat designed for Keigo, and struggling to hide his face. Let's just say Izuku had in fact cleaned the mess he had made, and stood with his nose in the corner, all without the hug and comfort Keigo had wanted to offer, but the boy had firmly denied. He had found another limit from the winged hero. Crossing his arms as the car pulled to a stop outside a one-story building, Izuku glared harshly at Keigo. "I'm not going in." Nodding, the man pulled out his phone. "We can take our time. Like I said earlier, they have the whole day." Crossing his arms and looking at the building, Izuku's eyes lingered on the door handle. How far would get it? He legged it. True, the car was modified for Keigo, but the door was still too small, it'd be a struggle to get out quickly. But he could fly, fast, and he'd have a view and speed advantage over Izuku. Unless he traveled somewhere where the sky was more crowded, which was more difficult to come by in this suburban area. If he... Don't even think about it. There was a sigh. "I'm not going to give up on you, Duckling." Flicking his gaze to Keigo's in the mirror, Izuku withheld his glare, hands gripping his hoodie so tight the material strained. He was met with only security and honesty from those golden eyes, and he felt sick at the clench of his heart. Because he wanted to believe him, he truly did. But it was horse shit, a pack of lies as a way to make Izuku vulnerable before hauling his butt to therapy, only to be told he had mommy and daddy issues. He'd have needed a mommy and daddy for that, so it was a pile of FING trash. Lies from unqualified people making stuff up and taking the obvious and using it as a blame. They'd stick him on some medication before sending him to a detention facility. "I don't care what the F you do." Nearly an hour passed before Izuku grumbled, snapping his head to Keigo, and wishing his neck broke in the process. He was too tired for this. "I'll go in, and they can say whatever the F they want, and then we go. Deal?" Nodding, Keigo climbed out and opened Izuku's door. "Deal." Walking into the building felt like walking to the electric chair, blood thrumming with adrenaline once the thought of running skipped his mind, the presence of Keigo like a guard, yet not overwhelming. It didn't smell like antiseptic like he was expecting, but lavender. It wasn't white like a hospital either, nor the horrible pastel paintings they had, a warm feeling coming from the carpet and the light blue patterned wallpaper. The women at the desk looked up, pulling the glasses onto her forehead and smiling, not at Izuku, but at Keigo. It was as if she'd known how he would have taken it. "Ah, Mr. Takami, I'm Sayori, I'll be the therapist running these sessions. Are we ready now or would you like a cup of tea first?" Keigo spared a glance at Izuku, before nodding. "We're ready now, if it's no imposition." She laughed, shaking her head and beckoning them to follow her room. Izuku stopped in the doorway, stepping back into Keigo's chest and feeling his stomach clench. "Duckling?" Scowling, Izuku tried to push him backwards and create an exist. "I break the deal, I'm not FING doing it." Sayori didn't faze, nodding. "Okay, we'll start in the lobby. Take a seat, I'll be out in a moment." Keigo stepped back and to the side, blocking the way to the exit but allowing him to back away from the room. Izuku took a seat, leaning against the wall to its side and placing his feet on the one beside him, forcing Keigo to sit one away. "Izuku, please don't stand on the furniture." Challenge rose in his chest. Or WH-. "It's quite all right, Takami, as long as you both are comfortable. Now, Izuku, would you mind me sitting here?" She gestured to the coffee table 2 feet from him, and Izuku shrugged, glaring at her. "Do whatever you want, what a stupid question. Don't therapists have to pass exams?" She, once again, wasn't fazed by his sarcasm, and sat on the table, crossing her legs. "If it's an area you're interested in, I'll answer any questions." Izuku scoffed, and her attention turned away from him. "First off, Takami, how have you been handling having Izuku in your home? Emergency fostering can be demanding on both sides. Izuku, if you have any input or anything to argue from what is being said, please do." He would not. He was going to sit quietly and get the session over and done with. "It's been difficult. Duckling is still testing boundaries, and I'm still finding them myself." And so, Izuku's true torture began. Like most people, Izuku didn't remember falling asleep. To him, it was like flicking the lights off before flicking them back on, nothing but a blank space that seemed to last seconds. Most the time. Occasionally, when his eyes slip shut against his command and his brain more active, he'll dream. And yet another difference about Izuku, he isn't blessed with dreams of unicorns and dragons. Instead, it's the shadowed faces of his bullies, the twisting scorns of his old placements, the ghost of pain against his body. And when he did wake up from these dreams, it would be preferably to wake where he fell asleep. And in this current event, that should have been the lobby of the therapists. Not a car. With adrenaline running high, Izuku snapped open at the realization he was not where he was supposed to be, hands circling the seat belt as it jerked from his sudden movement. All of this alerted the driver, who ruffled his red feathers and watched Izuku's pale face through the mirror. Duckling, everything okay back there? Taking in a deep breath and forcing his shaking hands under his thighs, Izuku sunk back into the seat, looking out the window until his color returned and the scowl could overpower the fear. Fing dandy. Let's dial down the swearing. Me and Sayori spoke a bit, and I've got some more rules and some news. We'll discuss it when we get home. Ignoring that, Izuku watched the scenery, feeling his stomach clench, and sat up. Where are we going? He hated that his voice was strained, but his fear was real. He thrived on being one step ahead of everyone, but when he was completely in the dark, it made his skin crawl and throat close. Keigo took note. Matchies. I can't be bothered to cook. Want anything? Shaking his head, Izuku watched a woman help a small boy place a piece of paper over a tree, guiding the chalk in his hand to rub across the paper, creating the pattern. What's she doing? Keigo's frown went unnoticed by Izuku, who tilted his head when the kid jumped around excitedly, repeating it on another piece of paper. Tracing. Most schools teach it to kiddies as a way of getting them to appreciate nature. Izuku forced himself to pull his gaze away, biting his lip and crossing his arms. I must have missed that lesson. Sounds like sheet. No other words were shared until the drive-thru, in which Keigo ordered 2 boxes of nuggets and takes the short route home. Izuku can't help but appreciate this, no matter how much that makes him angry. Keigo was different, a mystery, and it was unsettling. It made the childish feeling of acceptance rise up, the things he'd forced to bury start reappearing. Feelings that kept him awake at night, taunting him, reminding him of what could have been. He let the greasy box sit in his hands, biting his lip harshly against the burn in his eyes. He needed to get away quickly before he lost everything he had built up these years. Keigo caught him before he could scamper to his room with a strict, but soft, instruction to sit at the table. His eyes widened slightly, causing him to freeze in his tracks. He was being sent away. He'd been brought greasy, unhealthy, but amazing food, told they'd be news, and straight after Keigo had spoke to a therapist. He was being sent away. If he knew that was all it took, he wouldn't have acted up that morning. Unless that was the reason. And yet, a bone-crushing sadness overwhelmed the cheer at his success. Unlike usually, he didn't feel relieved, happy, thankful. He wasn't excited, nor was he adding techniques to his long list of how to get moved. He felt a coldness seep through him, a disappointment, slight regret. It was strange, unnerving, wrong. Shaking that out of his head, he was happy. He was finally going juvie. He headed to the table, slouching in his usual seat and taking a nugget from his unopened box, not eating it. He was going to throw it at the overgrown chicken, maybe. Moving past him and placing a glass of water down in front of him, Keigo sat opposite, taking a bite from his own nuggets. He wasted no time. First of, Duckling, we're not sending you to juvie. No matter how hard you try. But this behavior cannot continue, so I'm going to be implementing some new rules now you understand the old ones. Izuku didn't get chance to interject. We'll also be starting a timetable that we'll be following strictly, however that will only have mandatory activities. You'll have plenty of free time. Izuku would not be following that. From Monday onwards, you'll be starting in the school down the road. Hitoshi goes there, and will be in your class, so we'll know immediately if you don't go to class. Any schoolwork missed will be schoolwork you do at home. Keigo was sending Izuku to his grave, not juvie. He didn't know what school used to be like for Izuku, and no doubt it would be the same. He was going to be tortured, the victim, the attacker, the blame. The school's new scapegoat. It made him angry. Scared. This is what is best for you, no other intentions. Izuku hated those words, more than anything, as they burned his heart. He had heard them before, over and over, so much they haunted his dreams and stuck to him like a tattoo. His glare snapped to Keigo, so much harsher and nastier than ever before, less of an act, and he spat at the man with venom that rivaled a villain. F you. Izuku didn't leave his room for 2 days. Izuku looked at the broken skin across his knuckles, smiling slightly at the similarity to the situation. Once again, like many before, Izuku was sat isolated in the school office waiting room, sporting a bruise under his chin and a bloody nose. There was scratch marks down his forearms, an ache in his ribs, and a very deliberately placed foot-printed bruise on the side of his knee. It was the worst he'd come off in a while, but it wasn't like his other fights. He hadn't been fighting drunks or high people. He'd attacked a group of school kids who were known as bullies. Sighing, he flexed his hands, feeling his fingers ache, and leant back in his chair, looking up at the clock. He'd made it nearly 3 hours of the school day before getting in trouble. New record. Oh, hey! Snapping his gaze to the side, green met red, and Izuku rose an eyebrow. A kid his age had shuffled into the waiting room, rubbing the back of his neck, hand brushing under the longish black hair and red eyes, looking down in embarrassment. Izuku wondered if the scar above his eye was quirk-influenced or from bullies. I'm sorry, man, I got you involved and in trouble dash. Cutting him off, Izuku huffing sharply and crossing his arms, glare softening against his command. You didn't get me into shit. Those pricks had everything coming for them. The boy looked Izuku dead on then, blinking a second in confusion, before his face split into a sharp-toothed grin. Sure, okay. Auntie taught me manners, so I'm going to say thanks anyway. Thank you, Takami was it? Izuku hated that name. Izuku. And that was strange, Izuku never offered his name to anyone, but this kid. He was one that Izuku would tolerate. He subconsciously knew that even if he tried to push him away, he'd probably forcibly pry into his life. Ijiro then. You, in trouble? Nodding, Izuku kicked his feet up, ignoring the spike of pain in his knee, onto the chair beside him and looked to the clock. That's the goal. You've got a quirk, right? A confused nod. Use it. Don't let them shitheads bully you. Ijiro nodded, laughing awkwardly and leaning on the door frame. It wasn't bullying. They were just messing around. Yeah, no one believes that. Can you F off? Grinning, Ijiro shook his head and flopped on the chair beside Izuku and leant against him. Izuku felt all the breath leave him instantly. Most kids didn't want to be in the same aerial code as him, never mind leaning on him. Izuku, it's a weird name. Rolling his eyes, Izuku tilted his head back, looking at the ceiling. Insulting my name. Change my mind, you call me Midori, He cut off, but Ijiro didn't say anything, instead fake crying. Zukuin. Don't be so cruel. Izuku didn't have time to scold him for the name before Keigo stepped into the room, stern eyes landing on him instantly, enough to make a cold shiver run up his back. He pulled his gaze away, and even Ijiro sat up straight, looking down. Izuku Mr. Hawk sir. It's my fault. Zukuin was only helping me, I swear. He helped me against some. Red eyes snapped to Izuku, bullies. Izuku whipped his head to Ijiro, about to hiss at him to shut up, but Keigo stepped forward. Gold eyes scanned the pair. Is this true? No, why would I do sheet fo dash? A hand smothered Izuku, Ijiro pleading with wide red eyes. It is. I'm really sorry, I am, but please don't blame him. Pushing the hand away, Izuku glared at them both, crossing his arms. Those pricks deserved it. Sighing, Keigo nodded to Ijiro. Okay, I'll take it into account. Make sure you give Izuku your number, he'll be getting a phone soon, then head back to class. Izuku, stay put. And like that, he vanished into the principal's office, and Ijiro spun to Izuku. Your Hawk's son? No, he's my FING foster guardian. Not for long if I can help it. Scrunching his eyebrows, Ijiro tilted his head. That's really cool, man, why would you want to leave? Wait, that sounds ignorant. I mean, he sounds like he cares. Izuku pretended not to care. I went through a few foster placements before my aunties took me in. He cares, stupid. Izuku grumbled at the hand digging into his head. Ijiro sure got FING confident. So, who's your friend? Izuku ignored him, biting his lip when Keigo poked at his knee. It FING hurt. The winged man tried again. Ijiro Kirishima, right? You look close, did you meet before? Huffing, Izuku kept looking away. No, he's tolerable. Nodding, the hero wrapped a support bandage around the joint, sighing through his nose. If you're still limping in a few days, I'll call in a favor with recovery girl. Did you got Kirishima's number? The kid hadn't let Izuku go until a number was written on his arm in Sharpie. He nodded. Good, invite him and his guardians over this weekend. Consider this your punishment for getting in a fight on the first day. Izuku avoiding Ijiro for all of 3 hours the next day. That's what it was, avoiding. He'd gotten soft. He'd never had an issue with being rude and isolating himself from people his age before, but suddenly the idea of being mean to Ijiro caused his stomach to twist and heart clench. He couldn't put himself in a position where he could get hurt, not again. If he let Ijiro become his friend, opened up to him as he would have done before, he was presenting all his weaknesses. Offering them on a platter. And then once he found out, he would use it against him. The scar just under his rib cage burned in warning. But, in the school, he had limited room, minimum hiding spots. The roof was quickly discovered. Of course, Izuku wouldn't admit that the doors were locked and he'd picked them, and the fact quickly left Izuku's mind as he settled against the wall, earphones plugged in and volume loud. Keigo had given him a phone the previous night, watching him send the message to Ijiro and warning him about the parental app on there. At least he had gotten music. Sighing, he closed his eyes and leant his head back. It was calm. Until it wasn't. Dude! Fingers tugged his earphones out, red appearing in front of him as Ijiro flopped onto the ground, legs crossed and leaning forward with a grin. You look like sheet. Izuku did, in fact, look like sheet. His nose was slightly swollen, lips scabbed, and the bruise under his chin a horrid yellow color. His knee still ached, and when he fully extended it or added pressure to it in a bent position he felt a shot of pain. Never mind the fact he had hardly slept the night and the generally sickly appearance he carried. Raising an eyebrow, Izuku kicked out, landing a light hit on the other's arm and turning his attention to his phone. Before he could speak, there was a slam of a fist against the open door and a heavy panting. "Kirishima, you must be the infamous Izuku." Snapping his gaze to her and letting it harden. She was leaning against the door, face flushed as though she'd run up the stairs, they probably both had, and making her pink skin look more red around her cheeks. Small horns poked from her pink hair and her yellow irised eyes lit up. Ijiro sighed. "Mina. Quiet down, if anyone hears we'll get in trouble." She sighed loudly, wedging one of her shoes in the door and moving to lean over Ijiro's shoulders, smiling brightly. "You look pretty gloomy for a guardian angel." Right, Izuku had had enough. "Trust me, I won't do anything like that again." Frowning and shrugging her off, Ijiro furrowed his eyebrows. "That'd be counterproductive. You'll have to help people to be a hero." Izuku tensed, defenses falling instantly and catching their attentions immediately. A snarl curled his lip. "And why the F, would I want to be a hero?" Apparently, the red-eyed fool didn't take caution at the killer gaze. "I assumed. Everyone our age wants to be one." Gritting his teeth, Izuku clenched his fists. "Don't be a prick and assume. I can't be a hero." And Izuku began the setup to his failure. He'd rather let them know and get the fact in the open with as little delay. Ijiro tilted his head slightly. "Why?" Taking a deep breath and preparing himself for the laughter, the scorns, the torments, Izuku gave a harsh laugh. "I'm quirkless." "So?" Izuku bit into the skin around his thumb, eyebrows furrowed as he glared at the inked page. When his mind still drew a blank, he slammed his pencil on top and went to storm off, fists clenched, stopping only when the feather around his ankle vibrated. Keigo looked up from his book on the other side of the table. "Everything okay, Duckling?" Clenching his jaw, Izuku nodded, going to take another step before he was interrupted. "Then finish your homework. It's stupid. When the F, am I going to need it in the future?" He didn't even care when a token was dropped in the swear jar, recently set up, and felt his anger simmering. "Sit down and I'll help you. You got far without needing it." Especially after not going school for 2 years was unsaid, but burned Izuku's ears nonetheless. He did stiffly, thudding into the seat and leaning back. He couldn't, let himself get distracted. After Ijiro's and Mina's anticlimactic response, they'd been called to lesson and nearly scolded for being on the roof. It had fried his brain. No one was supposed to respond like that, it wasn't Natu. "You listening?" Blinking back to reality, Izuku jumped slightly when he realized Keigo had moved beside him, explaining the question and writing around it in light pencil. However, for a moment Izuku watched his eyes. Keigo had been like Ijiro and Mina. Like Hitoshi, Shoyuta. And Hizashi. Izuku needed to leave, soon. So, that's what he did. The next day, he cut off the feather on his ankle, paying someone with an amazing scissor quirk, and bolted. He'd turned off the tracker on his phone and had someone hack into the parental limiter. All while dodging Hitoshi. He had been proud of himself at the time, but less than 5 hours later and across the city, he looked at the phone in defeat. He felt numb, cold to his core as he pressed the number, allowing it to ring by his ears. "Izuku, where Ryo dash?" Izuku cuts him off, voice thick and muffled. "Can you pick me up? I turned my locations on." There was a pause, before a flapping. "On the way." Izuku waited until he heard the call cut, gripping his phone and crossing his other arm over his knee, planting his face further into them. The petrol station lights flicked behind him, the curb not helping his hunched position and making his lower back ache. He hadn't noticed the drizzle until a water drop fell onto his hand from his damp hair. There was a soft thump to the side, before footsteps stopped beside him. "Ready to go?" Nodding, Izuku pushed to standing, keeping his head lowered, wrenching it away when fingers gripped his chin. They did again, and this time he couldn't resist as it was pulled up, exposing his damp eyes and the bruises along his throat and cheek, the cut across his nose. If Keigo was angry, he didn't show it. Instead, B draped his coat over Izuku's shoulders and kept a hand on his lower back, voice soft and comforting. "Let's go. I got in a fight." Keigo raised an eyebrow, surprised at the sudden confession, and gently dabbed the bruises. He knew that whatever had happened in the hours the 12-year-old had been gone had affected him. He was unusually quiet, SBMSSV. He hadn't put up a fight as Keigo lifted him onto the counter, nor when the red feather wrapped his ankle, not even when Keigo wiggled him out his hoodie and leaving him in the simple white top. "I can see. You didn't do much punching by the looks of it, they got you good. Any reason?" His breath hitched, looking down and failing to notice how Keigo listened for any croakiness that showed any harm done to his throat. The bruising were worrying, and Keigo was one throat clearing away from calling recovery girl. I was set off. Nodding, Keigo wiped the blood that was beginning to fall from his split lip. Just this once, he'd gnawed out a token in the swear jar. One more weight on his shoulder and he feared Izuku's back would break in half. Even more so than ever, he looked fragile. For the fun of it? Wincing at the disinfectant on his nose, Izuku reared back for a second, before letting the winged hero continue. I saw her. His eyes burned with tears, heart picking up slightly as his hands shook. He tucked them under his thighs, not daring to look up. She was pushing a kid on the swings, hugged him and everything. And I realized she was capable of loving, just not me. Wasn't spoken, but Keigo knew. Nothing was said, and Izuku prepared for the punishment, but instead felt a claw scratching through his hair. It was soothing. Even more so when the hand touched his forehead, a coolness against the heat. You're getting a fever. Shower and come to the kitchen. I can't reward you for your behavior, but I can't punish you for feeling that. Nodding, Izuku waited for him to leave, returning with a towel and Izuku's pajamas a minute later, and finally let the door click shut. Once he had, he crumbled, tears raining down his face as he limped off the counter, stripping and taking a seat beneath the scalding water. It made him uncomfortable. His fever, Izuku didn't get sick, not enjoying the extra warmth, but all lower temperatures felt freezing. And he cried. Sobbed for all those years he hadn't. Because all Izuku had ever wanted was a hug, his ma's love. He'd set it in his mind that she had loved him, just differently to how other parents loved their kids. She loved him, but didn't know how to show it. But the truth behind the DMN of lies he'd built had been proven, that his mama hadn't loved him. All he'd ever wanted was a hug, and he'd worked hard for one. He'd done chores, made his own lunch, read his own bedroom stories. He'd only ever asked for essentials and never bothered her with menial things. But it hadn't been enough. That other kid, however, had it all. Not even before Izuku had been diagnosed was she loving. It was Izuku she couldn't love, her own son. Her flesh and blood. He'd never had been worthy, she never would have loved him. He would never have been loved. He would never have been. And Izuku screamed. His hands dug in his hair, palms pressing into his ears and chest burning as he screamed. And once he had done, and he was left breathless and achy, a knock on the door cleared the static in his brain. The hot chocolate's ready when you are, Duckling. The weekend rolled around quicker than Izuku had wished, and soon enough he was opening the door to that stupid toothed grin. He looked different outside of his school uniform, a red bandana keeping his limp fringe out the way, a black hoodie with red seams highlighting the stitching, a white top, Crimson's riot icon just visible, and black ripped jeans. Izuku ignored the bright red shoes, slightly annoyed at his stolen trademark. Behind him were two women, arms bundled in wrapped objects. The taller looked scarily similar to the kid. Her long hair was black, the edges also looking rigid. Why did his hair do that? And teeth slightly pointed. Her eyes were a sharp blue, however. Besides her was the smaller woman, who had a mildly rounder face and softer features. Her curly hair was platinum, hanging to her shoulders, showing the closed gills around her neck. Her eyes were more like crystals, shimmering in the sunlight, much like the scales to the sides of her eyes. Dude. Yup, Izuku wasn't ready. A hand caught the top of the door before he could close it, Keigo smiling kindly. Please come in. You boys can head to Izuku's room if you wish, I'll come for you when dinner is done. A few greetings were made, in which Izuku discovered the taller was Himari and her wife was Yua. They'd insisted on given names, and Izuku began walking away, Ijiro following closely. His smile faltered a little when he looked around the bare room. DMN, I was hoping for something cool. Or embarrassing. It's just empty. Izuku shrugged, flopping into the windowsill. I'm not staying much longer. There was a sigh, Ijiro kicking Izuku's legs closer to him and sitting on the other side of the sill. There was enough room for two comfortably, knees bent and feet slightly intertwined. I yelped slightly at the whack on the arm. Don't be an idiot. I don't think Keigo is going to let you go. Raising an eyebrow, Izuku shrugged at him. That caused Ijiro to whack him again. You weren't in Thursday. Keigo had let him have the day after seeing Inko. Nodding, Izuku leant back. Good observation. Huffing slightly, Ijiro watched someone walk past with a small frown. My mom and dad died in an accident when I was 5. I was never compatible with any foster homes. Izuku's eyes washed over his briefly. My quirk was too much to handle. It'd go off whenever I lost control of my emotions. I was 5 and my parents had died, so it happened a lot. His laugh was broken, and Izuku tapped his leg with his foot. I broke things, whatever I was holding, the chair I sat on, my bed. Everything. I broke another kid's arm at one point. Guilt filled his voice, and Izuku was desperate to shout at him, to tell him it wasn't his fault. He didn't get the chance. Luckily it lined up with Himari winning the lawsuit and they took me in. She was my mum's sister. They got me quirk therapy and counseling and the whole deal. Izuku's eyebrow twitched, and Ijiro smiled. Everything worked out for me. I don't know what you went through, but I know what it's like to be moved around a lot. Not wanting to get comfortable just to up and leave again. He sighed. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you need someone who understands a little, I can actually shut my trap. Not pressing, Ijiro watched the world go by, mouth opening in preparation to burn his ears with the latest game he'd been playing when Izuku spoke up. Voice quiet and thick. My ma surrendered me when I was 8. Tears brushed in his vacant eyes. My dad left when I was 4 because I was quirkless. She wasn't, they said she was neglectful. The first couple of placements I went to were worse than home, even though they were supposed to be better. Izuku didn't show the scars that burned alone his body. So I learned not to trust anyone. Made sure I was moved before I could grow comfortable in a placement. I was one placement away from juvie, this one. I saw her Tuesday. I ran off, saw her pushing a little kid on a swing. His eyes strayed to the red feather around his ankle, or the slight lump under his sock where it brushed his skin. Why'd you want to go juvie? Izuku shrugged, before crossing his arms over his knees and meeting his red eyes. No one lies. They don't say you're safe when you're not. He wasn't sure why he was telling Ijiro this, he'd never told anyone. It had been his little secret, the weakness he'd kept hidden all this time. But, he felt the weight on his shoulder lift slightly. Giving a small laugh, Ijiro kicked his ankle slightly. I don't think Keigo is going to hurt you. Besides, if you get shipped off to juvie I'll lose a bet against Mina. Smiling slightly, Izuku let his eyes fall on the hero symbol. He took a deep breath. Crimson Riot fan? It was nearly 5 hours after Ijiro and his aunts left. Izuku found himself hovering outside Keigo's room. His hands were shaking, stomach churning as he felt dinner threatening to rise and spill. His cheeks were red and eyes sore, hair stuck to his forehead and back damp from sweat. He didn't remember the nightmare, but by the aching across his back he had a pretty good idea of what it was. Shakily inhaling, Izuku knocked on the door, letting his hands clench to his side. He needed someone to check the dampness along his back was sweat, not blue. He needed someone to check because he couldn't. The delay between his knocking and the door opening was short, and Izuku met Keigo's half-lidded eyes. They snapped open when he caught sight of the kid. Duckling, everything okay? Nodding with a gulp, Izuku opened his mouth. No words left. Keigo gave a soft nod and opened the door wider, gently ushering Izuku in. This was the first time Izuku had seen the space, and was surprised to see the bed hanging high above the ground. Well, it was less of a bed and more like a upside-down dome full of pillows and blankets, the sides higher up and creating a guard against the possible fall. Let's go the nest, okay? Hold on. An arm wrapped Izuku carefully, a single beat of wings and they were collapsed in the middle of the mess of pillows. It was comfortable, extremely. But that wasn't on the front of Izuku's mind. His finger hooked in the adult's sleeve, looking anywhere but at him. He hadn't hurt him yet, he could risk it this once. Right? Duck dash. Could you check my back? It's not bleeding? Nodding, Keigo carefully turned the boy around and lifted his shirt, careful to keep his shock to himself. Pulling at the skin, currently red and twitching, were 3 slashes across his back. Long scarred and healed. He let the kid's shirt drop carefully, pulling off the hoodie and offering it to Izuku. No blood. Change into this, you'll catch a cold if you sleep in that. The boy was too shaken to notice the open back, which was a relief. If Izuku thought that the sweat on his back was blood, he was going to let it dry. Now, Keigo had seen photos of the injuries inflicted on Izuku in the past few years, medical ones when he'd been sedated and treated. A small child that looked even smaller on the hospital bed, body battered and tortured. But it was obvious he'd gained more over the years. In his hazed mind, Izuku pulled his shirt off, exposing his torso, and now Keigo understood why he'd been so protective over it in previous weeks. One of the lashes from his back curled around his side, poking at his ribs. A thin white line traveled down his left ribs, a medical scar. Keigo had read he'd undergone surgery after having 2 ribs shattered. Beneath his right ribs was a harsh patch of scars, a self-inflicted wound over an older one. Izuku had sliced over a brand. On his collarbone was a rough area of wrinkled, light pink skin, vaguely resembling a hand print. He'd noticed that on those photos too. An old wound no one was sure it came from, but definitely before he was surrendered. Keigo dragged his eyes away before Izuku could notice and pulled a shirt he found on, assisting Izuku when his arm poked out a wing slot. His hand brushed Izuku's forehead, a frown tugging at his lips. It was hot, clammy almost. Your fever's back. Izuku's wet eyes blinked, and he murmured something incoherent. Keigo nudged him slightly. And the kid leant into it slightly. Enough to be noticed. I thought it went away. Nodding, Keigo pulled the bauble, keeping his fringe out the way, and tied what he could grasp of the curls. It only lasted the night, probably didn't go but was regulated for a while. You stay here, I'm going to get you a water bottle. Nodding lazily, Izuku curled around a pillow as Keigo vanished, nuzzling into the smell. Keigo used a specific fabric conditioner, and as much as focused Izuku wouldn't admit it, it brought around a sense of comfort. Lavender. He jolted slightly when a rag was draped over his head, not realizing Keigo had returned, or that he really left. Time seemed to morph together in a muffled way. Sniffling and sipping the water as he was sat up and the bottle pressed his lips, Izuku found himself unable to fight back. He didn't want to, he was tired. That's it. Try and get some sleep, I'm just here if you need me. It was as Izuku lay back down and his fingers hooked onto a wing that he spoke again, sleeping before he finished properly and letting the word drag slightly. Please, please don't send me away. Brushing a stray strand of green away, Keigo shook his head at the sleeping child. I won't. And he didn't. And over time, Keigo found Izuku fought less. There were more occasions where the supposed intelligent kid with a big heart he had been told about shone through. Vulnerable moments where the hero was fearful to move in case he lost it. They were few and far between, but they were there. Izuku was the attacker in less fights, the victim in less fights, and rarely was he purposely being the boy he had at first. He had slowly stopped his runaway attempts, especially after that day, and purposefully antagonizing his adult. Of course there were relapses. Days where something had set him off before morning and he'd be argumentative and distant. Days where he'd skip classes, where Ijiro would find him sat on the roof, and he'd utter only insults to Keigo. On those days Keigo implemented the traumatized Duckling code, and family dinner and movie night were mandatory. But no more than that, he needed the kid to know he was there but not cross more boundaries than necessary. And of course Izuku still had strong opinions against many things, like therapy, but they managed. But Keigo never gave up on him, and it showed. Izuku had gained weight, face slightly rounder and ribs no longer poking from his skin. He was still skinny and lanky, whilst being short, but he was a growing boy. It made sense. He had slight color under his skin and the seemingly permanent broken lip and bloodied nose was gone. He swore a lot less, and didn't always glare. Keigo even saw a smile every so often. In those rare, miracle, moments. And of course, like promised, the restrictions loosened. His curfew was extended, and as long as he sent a message every hour, the feather around his ankle wasn't necessary. They freed up his schedule a little and therapy was every fortnight instead. By the day, Izuku was getting closer to a more normal life. And as they approached the 6th month, Izuku found himself huddled in the bathroom, slightly overgrown hair pinned back and chemicals burning his nose. Sat on the floor, arched slightly to prevent getting any dye on the walls, was Ijiro. I can't believe you talked me into his. Smirking, Izuku sat on the edge of the tub, flicking through the feed on his phone, absently looking for any updates. He wouldn't admit, but those times when he knew Keigo was out on patrol, during his school hours, he feared once again being left alone. So sue him for keeping up to date. I can. You're weak. Izuku gripped the side to prevent falling when shoved, scowling at the soon-to-be redhead. Don't even think about it. Taking the threat lightly, Ijiro sighed. I still can't believe you convinced my aunts. To that, Izuku scoffed. Please. I convinced Keigo dye the tip of his wings blue. That had been a funny week, turns out dye washes out of feathers very easily. Laughing boldly at the memory, Ijiro grinned. Careful Icarus. Icarus? Raising an eyebrow, Izuku met Ijiro's eyes. You know? Flown too close to the sun? We read it a few years back. Oh, yeah. Anyway. Icarus got trapped in a maze with his dad for something, I can't really remember. But this dude's dad was a really good inventor and made them these wax wings to escape. Izuku didn't like this story. His dad told him not to fly too close to the sun, but he had wings and was excited, flew as close as he could before they melted and he fell into the sea. Izuku really didn't like this story. Kinda reminds me of you. Snapping his eyes to him and ignoring the hatred for the story in his guts, Izuku sneered. Why the F dash? Humming a laugh, Ijiro returned to look at his fingers as they fiddled with the towel wrapped over his shoulders. He just wanted freedom. Izuku turned to the sink with eye roll. 40 minutes, right? Izuku nodded, drying his hands once again. No amount of washing had managed to rid his fingertips of a light red. Yeah, I can wash it out now. Don't get any of my floor. Ijiro grinned and nodded, both hiding their shiver of fear, and inched towards the bath, leaning forwards over and wincing at the slop as his hair fell off his head and hit the tub. Humming slightly, Izuku found the perfect temperature before washing out the dye, eyebrows furrowing as he watched the red drain away. And the pink slowly come into view. He stopped, tapping the other boy on the shoulder. What color did you get? Huffing, Ijiro sat up, pink ball of water running from his hair and onto his shoulders. Red, why? Biting his lip to stop laughing, Izuku pointed to the mirror, watching with ever-increasing difficulty as Ijiro stood slowly and positioned in the mirror. And screamed. The scene was slightly different as Keigo slammed the door open, ready to protect his son and the child's best friend, only to find Izuku wheezing from laughter, eyes streaming as he sat fallen into the bathtub. Keigo didn't have to ask, spotting Ijiro on his knees, openly sobbing into the air and shouting prayers, hair bright pink. Keigo shut the door and walked away. Izuku chewed on his nail, eyebrows furrowed and hunched on the windowsill. His stomach cramped slightly, rumbling silently. He hardly noticed, not even aware of the aching in his fingertips as he pulled aimlessly at the skin, blood staining his nails and tips. His hair was sections off, the bottom curls scratching his nape whilst the top half knotted around a thin bobble, strands not quite long enough springing forward and itching his forehead. It was greasy and matted, not washed or brushed in nearing a week. His hoodie, well not his, the one he'd borrowed from Keigo all those months ago, was beginning to smell, the material soft and beginning to fade. There were old food smudged down the front, the only evidence he'd not changed it in 7 days. He felt anger brimming under the tightness in his chest. School had been off for 2 weeks, a separation between the terms, and whilst Izuku has putting up an annoyed front, he had been curious to how Keigo would act. Wondered whether he'd get to spend the break like normal kids. He'd been wrong. All in all, it was as if Keigo didn't know. Not long before, he had taken in an intern, and whilst Izuku knew the hero and hero student spent most the day together, he hadn't affected him until now. Because Izuku hadn't seen the man who'd taken him in. By the time he woke up, his food was in the fridge. He cooked dinner, his FING therapist had recommended it, and Keigo returned after Izuku was supposed to be, in bed. Shoyuta and Hitoshi had taken him to the shop in the early week and Ijiro was on holiday. So Izuku was alone. Again. Izuku watched Keigo give his intern a grin at the front of the house after having returned for mere moments, hooking under his arms before pushing into the air. His nails pinched his skin as his fist clenched, stomach churning. He was being replaced, after Keigo had dragged his walls down and forced him to return to the child he used to be, he was going to be abandoned. Again. Izuku had been prepared for this, and Keigo had promised he hadn't needed to be. FING liar. Why had Izuku expected him to be any different? He was an adult. They were all the same. He said the same things and had acted the same way, only Izuku was stupid enough to actually believe it this time? Did he not learn the first and last time? It was a slippery slope from forgetting to abusing. First, Keigo would slowly push him away. Remove himself from the equation until Izuku needed him to badly he groveled and cried. Then, his agitation would grow. It'd be shouting, then threats, then punches, then quirks. But this time, Izuku was prepared. He knew that by the end, he was going to get hurt. So, he decided to skip a few stages, rid of unnecessary timings. He was going to be in control of when things were going to happen, he wasn't going to be caught off guard. Again. Another 4 days passed until Keigo and Izuku shared a meal together. The hero was exhausted, training students wasn't easy and the one he had gotten his hands on had potential for days. He just didn't know how or why. So a day off was exactly what he needed, not that his student becoming sick was a virtue. He slept most the day, wings aching from the awkward angle he had rested and body sore. Izuku's cooking had filled his nose as he pondered into the kitchen, fresh for the first time. He was so grateful for Ho's boy, the internship hadn't supposed to run over but there had been incidents involving his intern's quirk that were extreme. They needed to get a handle on it soon for safety reasons. And whilst he had wished to spend time with Izuku, it hadn't worked out and the boy had been so helpful. He promised himself the next term break he would book off work completely. Of course, he had frozen slightly at the state of the kid sat at the table, picking at his foot with one cheek resting on the back of one hand. His skin was pale, deep bags under his eyes and hair and clothes a mess. Izuku only really held this appearance on relapse days, and so he prepared himself. Grabbing the set-out plate and sitting opposite, Keigo poked him slightly as he passed. Long time Duckling. He saw the glare and ignored it, taking a bite. Izuku stood, catching Keigo's attention and holding the full plate, before dropping it on the floor by his feet, maintaining eye contact. When that doesn't get a reaction, he takes a step forward, aiming to stand on the shattered porcelain and food with the pad of his bare foot. Then, Keigo shoots forward, pulling the boy back just in time and planting his hands tight on his shoulders, a stern look passing his features. purposefully breaking objects, and putting yourself at harm. I'm going to give you one chance to explain yourself before consequence. Izuku hissed then, hands tightened and clenched, a dampness to his eyes. They were unguarded, but Izuku didn't notice. In the swirls were grief, a pain Keigo had not seen in them. Try me, bird fucker. Izuku didn't see the stunned silence as that, shock and immense grief, but as an opportunity. He saw it as hesitance, as realization and acceptance. He saw it as a threat. And felt fear crawl up his spine. Adrenaline spiked his veins, racing through them and lighting his body on fire. His fist clenched, teeth grinding together, and he punched. He ignored the tug at his heart, the pure guilt he felt, churning his stomach and battling the anger at his core, as his knuckles tore, hitting the hero on the cheekbone. Pain exploded up his wrist as he snapped his limb back, taking a staggered step back, squaring his shoulders and trying to ignore the burning behind his eyes. Why was he crying? Sniffling and dragging the back of his hands across his cheeks, smearing the blood from his knuckles and his tears, Izuku hiccuped, shakily breathing. Keigo straightened, eyes wide as he cupped his cheek. With the one step forward, Izuku took a screaming back. Fu F off. Leave me alone. You promised. You can't send me away. You promised. I won't let you. He sounded like a child, screaming through his breaking voice and sobbing. He kicked out as the adult took another step forward, hands out in surrender. Okay, I'll stay here. I'm not sending you back, I dash. Liar. You lied. Liar. 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 I won't dash. F off. Go away. Leave me alone. You're no different to the rest. You were always going to abandon and hurt me. I won't let you. As those words burned into both their hearts, Izuku spun and ran. His footsteps hammered across the house, and Keigo felt frozen to his core. Because he had done that. Keigo winced, rubbing his cheek and flinching when the door slammed shut. He'd messed up, screwed up so bad he feared never bouncing from it. The mistake was worse than he imagined, and the guilt was crushing. He should have known. He'd worked so hard to help Izuku, filled him promises he'd broken. Blindly assumed everything. Was stable because of tense situations, actions like that got people killed. He was a better hero than that, a better dad than that. Pressing harshly on a number and hissing when the face of his phone tapped his swelling cheek, he waited a whole of 2 rings before cutting off a yawn. I've effed up. There she was again, pushing the same kid with the big grin. She hadn't changed much from when Izuku had been surrendered, her hair was still the same lighter shade of green, brushing past her elbows and bouncing with every movement. A delicate tan to her skin and a light amount of makeup. The small amount of weight she had gained was gone, the expensive clothes hugging her frame with all stray gazes. The smile and sparkle in her eye was new, unseen. Izuku found himself leaning against a tree, watching with a tightness in his chest as she plucked the child off the swing. Surprisingly, the child looked less like her than Izuku did himself. He was rounder than the greenette had been at that age, the healthy amount of weight, probably. He got his meals cooked for him. His hair was straight, brown with natural blonde streaks. He lacked freckles, face clear of any marks, and skin more tanned, as though they'd gone on holiday. Izuku had never been on holiday. His eyes, however, were the green the 3 of them shared. In fact, they were identical to Inko's, missing the gold specks Izuku's had. Izuku hated him. His fists clenched in his pockets as she headed away, hand in hand with the child. And Izuku didn't realize until he watched her vanish behind a door that he'd followed, brain on autopilot. She lived where she had always promised she'd be, where she had aimed. Without Izuku. With another child. With love. And hugs. And smiles. And once again Izuku moved, climbing the few steps to the home and knocking hard on the wood door, knuckles burning as much as his heart. His body was shaking, stomach churning and chewing on itself, and he ached. He was breathless, as if having run a marathon. Lightheaded as his ears pounded. For a few seconds, he felt every brush of air on his skin, he heard every squeal of a laughing child, one from inside the house, saw every splinter on the door, tasted the clear air. Izuku? Izuku. Keigo's voice was relaxed as it called for him, and the boy turned slowly, teary eyes jerking to him. The man was stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands limp by his side and wings fluttering with each breath. His cheek was bruised, yet there was no anger left in Keigo's eyes. Izuku? With his back turned, Izuku hadn't realized the door had opened, nor that a woman had leaned against the frame with eyes wide. Snapping his attention back to her, his knees weakened, tears rolling down his cheeks. Because she remembered his name. She hadn't completely forgotten him, given up on him. She had loved him, he had meant something to her. And yet, he saw a ghost of the empty gaze behind her guilty eyes, an echo of the women she had been. It filled him with a sense of nostalgia. They'd been here before. Not long before he'd been surrendered, the first and previously only time he had seen emotion directed towards him. For a brief moment it was though the whole world had their eyes on him. No birds flew in the sky, no cars drove by, no children screamed and no adults gossiped. The world was silent, suffocating Izuku with tension as it thickened the air around him, sticking to his trachea and blocking his airway. His ears stopped ringing at a small voice, eyes snapping to the small boy as he tugged on Inko's leg, eyes switching between the three of them. Mama? Who are they? Izuku dragged his eyes off the kid, his replacement, and to his mother who let a hand fall onto his hair. Aiko, go on back inside and find your papa. Aiko, beloved one. A name perfect for the adored little boy. Izuku felt his heart break a little more as the kid ran off and Inko moved outside, shutting the door most the way behind her and stepped to Izuku. Her hands cupped towards his cheek, and Izuku flinched, arms wrapping himself and nails digging into his biceps. What was she doing? Why was she trying to hold his face? It didn't make sense, no one had done that before and no one was there to support him as his knees buckled, one arm dislodging to grasp onto the lower brick wall, the only thing supporting him for a moment as Inko shakily inhaled. Izuku dash. He cut her off, voice thick as his tears dripped off his chin, splashing into the brick below as he begged his legs to keep working. You dash, his voice failed him alongside, and she sniffled slightly. Izuku found his nose too blocked to follow this action. You've got so big. Look, just your papa, still haven't grown into your hair. He didn't want to hear it, because it meant she could have been like this the entire time. Izuku could have had a normal childhood, he could have grown in a home that loved him. He never would have been left, abused, arrested, never would have had to learn not to trust, nor to hide, to run, to pick any lock, to avoid punches, to throw the first punch. He wouldn't have scars and nightmares and trust issues. He'd had been happy, normal. You left me. She sniffed again, dabbing beneath her ears as if having released a tear, and nodded. I know, and I'm sorry. I made a mistake, and I was wrong. You didn't deserve the life you had, I should have cooked for you and helped you with your homework. I know that now, Aiko has taught me that. He still couldn't breathe, chest tight and stomach thick. You left me. He hadn't expected his voice to rise, catching the attention of the kid and supposedly his father in the window. She'd left Hisashi too, by the looks of it. She nodded again, voice quivering. I know. I've got a new life, one where I can properly provide for you now. I've changed Izuku, and now you're all grown up. But I'm here now. You can come home now. For the first time during the whole ordeal, Keigo spoke up. He didn't carry the same tone as Inko, didn't try and coax him in, but it was calm, warm and welcoming. As it was every time Izuku needed the comfort. Or you can stay with me, if you want. The choice is yours, Duckling. He didn't face Keigo, instead watched as Inko held her hands out again, fingers cupped and in shape for Izuku's to hold. She was flushed with emotion, tears pooling in her eyes. She looked strangely calm like that, compared to the red and wet mess Izuku's had become. She didn't appear real. Izuku looked back to Keigo, who only offered an encouraging nod, before turning back to his mother. Come on baby, come back to your mama. Izuku shook his head, tension in his chest loosening slightly as his eyebrows furrowed. You didn't dash. Her eyes softened further, and the sight made Izuku sick. I know, and I'm sorry. I was so young, and I let your condition cloud my judgment. She was lying. But I want to be a good mama now. Come back to me, baby boy. Another step back. And no. Izuku staggered down the steps, falling into Keigo's chest as the hero caught him, hugging him tight. He clenched his eyes closed, digging his forehead into the comfort. I'm so sorry. A hand soothed up his back, scratching behind his ear lightly. It's okay, you're okay. Let's go home. Keigo kept a firm grasp on Izuku, one arm over his shoulder in a hug and the other running up and down his back. He was all but leaning on him, knees shaking and threatening to buckle. Keigo wouldn't let him fall. His grasp was multitasking, grounding the kid and also making sure he wouldn't bolt. Keigo doubted he would, his legs were too weak and his was too tense in his arms, fingers grasping at Keigo's clothes, to be able to move before Keigo would know. But Izuku was more unpredictable now than ever before. The woman on the doorstep glowered, the arms she had extended up in motion for a hug not seconds before dropped to her sides and she huffed. Suddenly, Keigo understood. The emotion in her face completely vanished, instead replacing with a look he'd once seen his handlers hold. The same look of someone looking after another as an obligation. Fine, Izuku. I offered, but I see where your standards lie. Just remember, Izuku, you walked away from your mother. Izuku flinched, his sobbing coming to a stop as Inko walked back inside, smiling and telling the little boy to go on to his room before slamming the book closed. She never looked back. Keigo kept a grounding hand on Izuku's lower back as he guided him to the car, casting small glances to him. He had come prepared for fighting and screaming, he could handle them. Izuku followed a very distinct stage process, and each one had a different, effective, technique. Likewise, he could handle crying and sobbing from a child in a normal situation. But this wasn't a normal scenario. And this was Izuku. It was a new color on him, and didn't look good. In previous months it had shown through in small intervals, when the boy was unaware and in his own mind, but it was nothing in according to this. His face was blotchy, the skin irritated and red. His eyes were puffy, bloodshot and his eyelashes sticking together slightly with every, ordinarily many, blinks. His movements were stiff, shoulders shaking as tears continued to fall, not breaking even as Izuku gasped for breath. Keigo wanted nothing more than to stop and carry on the hug they had recently broken, but not there. Not outside of his mother's house. Not in the street. Not in this side of town. Once they were home, he could tend to his duckling's needs. Shoyuta nodded lightly to Keigo when they opened the car door, Keigo sliding in beside Izuku and doing the kid's seat belt when the boy simply pulled his knees up. He made sure to stay next to Izuku, wing out slightly and brushing against Izuku's arm but otherwise giving him space. They remained that way as Shoyuta drove, silent as they passed the landmarks Izuku probably grew up around. He bristled a little when they drove past an old flat block, and Keigo made note in case Izuku ran off as a place to check, but otherwise made no movement. His eyes were glued onto the seat head in front, nails biting into his biceps. Keigo would have preferred him not to, but whilst in the car he couldn't risk a meltdown. With his wings he was partially immobile. And yet, even as they stopped outside Keigo's and moved inside, Shoyuta confirming he'll call and check in later before going home, he moved as he was directed. So, Keigo moved them to his room, sitting the kid on his bed. "We're going to have a movie night. I'll order some takeout and we'll go in the nest." Izuku still didn't move, and Keigo picked up the scrunched pajamas and pulled a face. They were old and ragged. He had noticed Izuku had consistently worn his own clothes, not touching the ones Keigo had brought him. He never spoke about it, never forced Izuku, because he had been expecting it. So, he put them down and fished out a pair of the fresh bottoms and pulled his own hoodie off, hoping it will bring Izuku a little bit of comfort, before kneeling in front of him and pressing them onto his lap. "Get changed and come on out, I'll be just outside." He waited for the confirmation before standing and leaving, closing the door mostly and waiting. It took nearly 5 minutes for Izuku to emerge, nose buried in the orange hoodie and eyes cast down. Keigo smiled, keeping his usual grin up and stretched. "Right kid, off to the nest we go. Just gotta stop at my room for something first, need anything?" Izuku gave a small nod, ducking back in his room before returning. With a stuffed green cat. Keigo let his eyes bounce off it, smiling and gesturing for him to follow. He'd gotten the cat Teddy the first time they'd gone out shopping, and whilst it never seemed to leave its place on Izuku's desk whenever he walked in, the thing had began to wear. Izuku felt comfort from it, and that was all that mattered. As they passed the adult's room, he changed into his own pajamas, grabbed his laptop and phone, before they made their way to the nest. Which was a single room that went the whole 3 stories, a large hanging basket hovering at around the 2nd story. He lifted Izuku up with ease, depositing him on pillows and blankets, so many it seemed solid, before setting up a line of pillows for them to lean on and a blanket. The nest itself was about the size of a double bed, but circular, with a curved base that was a soft gradient. Enough that when they lay down, but wouldn't roll towards the safety bars. Even if someone fell, the safety nets would catch them. Keigo had them installed when he brought Izuku home, but they were messy and could potentially be painful. Keigo would just rather none fell. With the laptop playing old Disney movies and a blanket curled around them, food ordered and Izuku's eyes drooping, Keigo scratched the top of his head. Him and his son were huddled, Izuku calmer and more docile than ever seen before. Keigo just wished it was from different circumstances. Healing wasn't linear, and Keigo didn't accept Izuku to be an exception. 4 days immediately after, Izuku was withdrawn. Well, tried to be. Keigo kept them alone and together in the nest, a constant pressure on the kid's shoulder, lower back, forehead or hair. A subconscious assurance he was there and wasn't leaving. They ordered takeout and watched pre-work movies. Keigo allowed them to skip therapy that week. Soon enough, when Keigo noticed a more alert glint in Izuku's eyes, they set up a structure. A routine. It was simple, easy: wake up, shower, breakfast, a walk around the garden, lunch, free time, dinner, movie in nest. Free time ended up just being movies on the sofa, but it was a start. And it worked. Over weeks he noticed the boy picking himself up, taking Keigo's helping hand, and seemingly getting better. He was still quiet, and when he did speak his sentences were short and cut. Ijiro began dropping round in the evening, bringing Izuku's schoolwork, which they did together the next day, and hanging out with the kid for an hour before leaving. That had pushed a large movement in his recovery. They readied Ijiro's hair and played games on Ijiro's laptop. They returned to therapy, and whilst she was well aware of what had happened, and with the way Izuku had reacted to things before, he was still silent and pretended to sleep during sessions. They steered clear of it during the sessions. Instead, she spoke to Keigo separately and gave him instructions with updates. But like previously expressed, healing wasn't linear. The first time Izuku broke down and relapsed it had been a Friday. Keigo had noticed the higher tension and edge in Izuku all day, and the outburst had been well seen and apprehended. The same with the few following. However, nearly a month after the incident, Izuku was completely different, but as healthy as he could be. There was still the sense of his rebellious nature, but the boy who'd been showing through a lot was at the forefront. It was refreshing, in a way. Keigo still loved Izuku, he was his son, and it was only strengthened as he found a boy who obsessed over heroes and cats. It was muted and seemed precautioned, but it was still there. So when he found Izuku in his room, the journals he'd been using for analyzing heroes destroyed around him, the room a mess and window smashed, the lock badly damaged but holding, it had been a shock. When he'd stepped in, Izuku had screamed, yelling curses and swearing and blaming Keigo for his ma. It was irrational, but the boy wasn't in the right state of mind, before kicking and punching. By the time he reached Izuku, the child was crying. F off. F off you flying fucker. Overgrown chicken. Leave me alone. He didn't land an attack as Keigo scooped forwards, holding him tight against his chest and rocking a little. He writhed and screamed in the hug. Okay, it's okay. Once or twice Izuku smashed his head against Keigo's shoulder, nails digging into anything he could grasp, hitting himself on a few occasions, and voice becoming to crack as he just screamed. Keigo's ears were ringing by the time they made it to bathroom, shower on lukewarm and the two becoming drenched. His screams died and Keigo let him sit just ahead, hands on his wrist as he cried. Keigo smiled gently, rubbing a thumb over his arm. You with me now, kiddo? Hiccuping, Izuku nodded, wiping his cheeks on his own shoulders and shakily inhaling. We'll head to the shop tomorrow and get some more notebooks. At that, Izuku tensed before bursting out crying again. Keigo remembered just how young he was, 13 in 6 months, and let go of one arm to ruffle his soggy hair. Okay, let it all out. Once we're done, we'll leave it here and once the water's down the drain we'll forget about it. Izuku nodded absently. We'll dry off and change into some of my clothes and head to the nest. Tomorrow, we'll clean your room before Ijiro comes over. We can sort out the window then. He nodded again, and Keigo sighed. He hated this part. Want to tell me the thought process? Let me know what's going on in your noggin? Hiccuping, Izuku drew up his knees and rested his head on them, arms still in Keigo's hands. I don't know. His voice was still hoarse, and Keigo noted he had some ginger and orange juice in the fridge. Okay. If you figure it out, let me know. Ready to get out now? Izuku shook his head, liking his lips. 5 more minutes. Laughing, Keigo nodded and began to idly chat, watching Izuku's eyes droop slightly. He was tired, that was expected. Quickly, they got out and dried, changing into comfy clothes and heading to the nest. Izuku was silent for a while, sticking close to Keigo, absently running his hand through the wing cuddling him, until his eyes closed. I'm so sorry. Smiling, Keigo ruffled his hair, switching off the movie as Izuku yawned again. Nah, Duckling, you got nothing to be sorry for. Yeah, healing wasn't linear, but they were getting somewhere. Dude. Izuku looked up from his phone, stopping the footage of the villain fight and closing his notebook quickly. He trusted Ijiro, even Mina, but not 2 boys who emerged seconds later. They'd found solace on the school roof since Izuku's return. A little under a week ago. And it had been their moments of peace. Somewhere Izuku could drop the act. Somewhere accessible for Keigo if Izuku desperately needed him, that being the only reason the school allowing them. Not being caught off guard, Izuku pushed to his feet and made sure to keep a firm gaze on them. He was smaller than them, at a natural disadvantage if they wanted to start something. But it was nothing Izuku hadn't done before. Ijiro and Mina frowned at his reaction, and followed his eyes, sighing and tensing when seeing them. Apparently, they weren't aware they had been followed. See him on, guys, not cool. I already said he would say no. Mina went to speak, but the boys raised a hand. Shut it, girlie, and seriously, Kirishima, do you speak for the man? A guy with that much attitude surely has something to say. Alarm bells rung sharply in Izuku's head, and he tucked a hand in his pocket, tempting the idea to grip the feather. On one hand, Keigo would be there instantly if anything kicked off. On the other, Izuku could fight his own fights, if it led to that. One boy walked close to him, hand gripping his shoulder and a grin straining his lips. Izuku, right? You don't mind me calling you that? Careful not to let himself shrink, and to keep his face harsh but not tense, Izuku hissed. Takami. Shrugging, the bully gripped tighter. Right, that's why we wanted to talk to you. The other boy popped up, leaning on Izuku's other shoulder. He could see Ijiro and Mina looking anxious in the corner of his eye, but made sure not to look at them. Keep your eyes on the enemy. There's a little rumor going around that you're the foster kid of Hawks. We want you to do us a little favor. Shrugging, Izuku nodded. Sure, hit me. Grinning wider, the leader of the two boys pat Izuku's before gripping again. See, Daiki, told you he was cool. So, Izuku, the pronunciation of his name him want to tear their throats, we need you get us in the agency. An internship there will surely get us in UA. So, can you do that? Izuku waited a second, watching the boys' faces contort into smirks, assessed their eyes. Without touching the feather, he pulled his hand out his pocket. No use summoning the man they wanted to see. No. The faces fell, and everything happened at once. The boy leaning on him suddenly increased drastically in weight, pulling his shoulder down. Izuku resisted as much as he could, whilst the other's hand grew in size, longer nails piercing Izuku's clothes and digging into his skin. Still, he kept a straight face, glaring at the bullies. His hands twitched with the urge to punch, jaws clenching as he repressed the itch to bite. His mind raced with ways to get out, attacks to land that'd get him out safely, or blind them enough for him to get in enough punches. He did none of them, feeling his muscles strain as he resisted both warnings. What did you say? Ijiro was closer, Mina wrapped around his arm and stopping him. Her face was tense, angry, but restricted. She knew as much as Izuku that if the redhead intervened, Izuku was going to have to fight for two. Ijiro was well-intended, but not a fighter. Not yet. No. If you want an internship, threatening his kid isn't going to get you F-words anywhere. The heavier grunted, weight increasing. There's no threats involved, Izuku, just friendly persuasion. Huffing a laugh and feeling the nails dig deeper, Izuku rolled his eye. For now, at least. Just give us what we want, Izuku, and this doesn't have to go any further. We all know that if this kicks off, you're the one going down. Shrugging the best he could, Izuku scoffed, hands going back in his pockets. He avoided the feather. Why? 'Cause I'm quirkless, or because I'm outnumbered? Maybe because you've both been told all your lives you're going to be amazing heroes because your quirks are so fing amazing? Izuku couldn't help but laugh. I've dealt with much scarier a lot younger, so try. You think you are chubbiness of Godzilla hands hold anything against explosion? Go ahead. But the second either of you move that isn't a retreat, it's gonna be with broken noses. His warning was laughed at, and just as expected, the quirks intensified. So, Izuku shot his head forward, smashing it against one's nose before pulling his hand out and striking the other, both boys staggering back and holding their faces. Izuku ignored them, grabbing his bag and joining Ijiro and Mina, nudging them towards the steps. We're gonna be late to class. He sighed, not wanting to lose his phone if Keigo found out he was being tardy. Both were tense, looking back at the boys on the roof and at Izuku. The greenette looked away with hunched shoulders. Please don't tell Keigo, I couldn't, they wouldn't go away. Breathing deeply, Ijiro grinned and dropped an arm around Izuku's shoulders, careful of the new wounds, and directed them down the steps. First stop, bathrooms. We'll meet you for lunch, Mina. The girl nodded, running off with a wave, and Izuku allowed himself to be led. Ijiro huffed a laugh, squeezing him slightly. Explosions, huh? Nodding, Izuku sighed and smiled slightly. Yeah, real handful. More annoying than Keigo. Long time ago though. Izuku nodded to himself, yeah, a long, long time ago. Izuku's lip twisted between his teeth, absently pushing the food around on his plate. There was a tension in his shoulders, an itch he couldn't get rid of. It made his stomach knot, feel heavy. Made the food on his plate look unappetizing. There was more than one reason for that. His dinner was cold, leftovers from yesterday's, except he hadn't warmed up the rice properly and the vegetables had become stale. Keigo was working late tonight, and so had left Izuku with the option of ordering in or having leftovers. Izuku had eaten food a lot worse before, so leftovers were fine. Sighing and straightening up, Izuku glanced at his phone, ignoring the mass of memes Ijiro had sent him, and placed his plate back into the fridge. He wasn't hungry. The house always seemed quiet without Keigo, absent of his music, horrendous singing, loud television, sudden cheering. It made it seem a lot bigger too. Rolling his eyes, Izuku pocketed his phone and grabbed his spare keys, aiming for the door. It was a recent leeway, providing he was home before 10 and he kept the red feather in his pocket. At least it wasn't around his ankle anymore. It was nearing 7, so the streets were busy with people driving home, and there was a chill in the air, aided by the just set sun and hardly risen moon. Years of practice stopped him from pulling his hoodie across his body, hands loosely in his pockets ready to defend, and head low enough not to be accused of staring but enough he wasn't giving anyone an opportunity. He had been wandering for nearly 20 minutes when a voice called him, directed from the window of a cafe. He blinked, eyebrows furrowed as he looked at the waving women. She was hanging out the window, a grin on her face as she waved and beckoned him over. Looking before he crossed, he wasn't stupid, he made his way over, smiling at the women. Miss Noma? She looked better than previous times he saw her, and he realized it was probably due to the setting. And the fact she hadn't spent 12 hours scrambling to find him somewhere to go. Long time, Izuku, everything okay? She wasn't subtle. Of course she was worried. Izuku was alone on the streets during the dark hours, and she hadn't gotten a phone call to say he was missing. He nodded. Yeah, just out for a walk. Her grin was extra wide then, genuine joy making her look younger as she waved her hand again. Oh good. Do come in, Izuku. I'll buy you a pastry. Looking at the time, he thought for a minute before nodding. Excellent. Just round the corner when you walk in. Izuku found her easily, startling slightly. Somehow, from her angle out the window, he hadn't seen her company. Sat beside her on the small circular table were two small children, sharing almost identical features. A boy and girl looking no older than 6, their mother's curly ginger hair, the boy with her nose and the girl with her brown eyes. Much like their ma, they showed no signs of quirks, but their eyes seemingly glowed when they saw him. Miss Noma waved him over, kicking the chair out from under the table. Sit, sit. He did, and she smiled. This is Mika Tom, my twins. Sudden guilt hit Izuku, and he inhaled sharply, going to speak when Tom crossed his arms. You're the mean boy Mama worries about. Her eyes widened in horror, and Mika stuck her tongue out at him. Yeah. She says we have to be nice to everyone but you're mean to everyone. Izuku swallowed heavily, and his lips twisted between his teeth. Mika, Tom dash. He cut her off gently, gut continuing to twist. And I need to say sorry. His eyes flicked up then, and nervously back down. I'm sorry, Miss Noma. She smiled sweetly, reaching over and tapping his forehead. Nonsense, Izuku. I do what I can to protect my twins, and you did what you could to protect yourself. Although, a little too much at times. Izuku laughed lightly, and she stood. I'll go get your pastry, still sweet for Machi? Blinking in shock, the last time she'd brought him pastries was when she became his social worker, nearly 4 years ago now, and he was surprised she remembered such a minor detail. He nodded stiffly, and she patted the twins' heads. Be kind to my kid, you too. The second she vanished, Mika turned to him. Why were you mean? Inhaling deeply again, Izuku liked his lips. No matter how young, the kids deserved a reason as to why their mama would be worked to the bone. My mama wasn't as nice as yours. And then I met some mean people. Tom hummed, leaning forward. Like bullies? Izuku nodded. That was one way to put it. Mama said to us that she didn't want us to be mad at you because you were scared all the time. That must have been horrible. I get scared at thunder and zombies and Mama always hugs me. Mika nodded. Yeah. If your mama wasn't nice, did she not hug you when you were scared? More like never. Izuku nodded though, fingers gripping the material of his joggers. The twins pouted. That's not fair. Are you still scared, DMN? Why did kids ask so many questions? Izuku was sure he didn't when he was their age, but there was a very good reason for that. Sometimes, he had to remind himself his situation was a little different. Nevertheless, he nodded. Yeah, everyone gets scared. Mika sighed. Are you always scared still? At that, Izuku had to think for a second. No, not anymore. Your mama helped me find someone who hugs me when I get scared. Izuku grunted a little, exaggerating the weight of the child in his arms and feigning dropping her, letting little squeals escape her. They had sat and spoke for hours, and in the end the cafe owners had chased them out. With an hour to go, Izuku had offered helping Miss Noma carry her twins home, their little legs getting tired. It wasn't too far anyway, luckily. Mika giggled, arms wrapping tighter around Izuku's neck as he pulled his arms out, letting her hang. No. No. Aizu. He smiled softly at her hysterical shouts, lifting her back to his hip and following the social worker, pretending to ignore the way she discreetly glanced back. Remnants of this Izuku had existed when they'd met, and she'd seen it, but he'd vanished quickly. If Izuku was being fair, he wasn't sure if this part of him still existed. Apparently it did. Mika lowered her voice, looking up at him with sparkly eyes. We forgive you, Aizu. Furrowing his eyebrows, Izuku looked at her, and felt his heart pang with guilt. You shouldn't, Mika, but you're exactly like your mama. You're not like your mama. The sentence knocked the wind out of Izuku, and his step staggered a little. He looked at her again, looking at the sincerity in her gaze, and swallowed thickly. Apparently this Izuku was tied to the sensitive waterworks he'd buried long before. His eyes burned and he blinked away the tears, shakily thanking her as she raised a crumpled tissue to brush the wetness from his cheeks. It got so bad his vision blurred, and he was forced to stop, crouching down and letting the girl run to her mama. A hand was on his shoulder quickly. "Everything okay, Izuku?" He nodded, falling back the small drop to his butt and pressing his palms into his eyes. The darkness sparked into swirling colors as the hand rubbed his back. "So sorry. I just need a second." He didn't see Mika step forward, whisper what she'd said into her mama's eyes, and her face soften even more. She sat beside him, voice low and soothing. "You know, you were my first true difficult kid." Izuku sniffled. "The few before you were a lot younger, been through less, and settled in quickly. I was surprised when they gave you to me. I was still not long from being a rookie and I had no idea what to do with you. When I read your file, I was sure you were heading to juvie." He spluttered a laugh. "That was the PL plan." She chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, it was. Mika and Tom were still babies when I first met you. You were kicking the doctor as he tried to redo your bandages, remember?" Izuku nodded. "You were so tiny, you still are. A child. You'd been through more than any adult." Izuku took the tissue with a slobbered thank you. "I tried to get authorization to take you in myself, but with everything that had gone on and my twins, they wouldn't let me. It killed me, because I saw the way you acted around everyone. Different to me." Izuku huffed another laugh, wiping his still bawling eyes on his sleeve. "It took me a while to figure out why you were polite to me, kind even. You never swore directly about me, I never got called one of your infamous nicknames, you straight out never attacked me. Most of all, you never acted threatened." She sighed lightly. "I think I got it, though. So correct me if I'm wrong, okay? You never felt like you had to protect yourself from me because I took your side." She took Izuku's lack of response as an affirmative, and carried on. "You were a kid who needed someone to protect him, and you thought only you could do that. I tried to find the best people, the ones I thought you'd connect with the most." She rubbed his back again. "I didn't mind all the fighting and running away, and the placement swaps or the attitude, because you reminded me of my brother. We grew up in foster care too, and were separated. He used to sneak out every night to bring me chocolate. I get off track." She laughed lightly, and Izuku looked up to her. "Takami was a perfect setting, just too late, but he wore you down. Mika was right, you know? You're the Izuku now, not the one when you were 5 or the one you were a year ago. Not your mama." She smiled down at him. "I'm sure you're fed up of my voice, so let's get the Litlins back and I'll call Ta Dash." He cut her off, slamming into her side in a hug as he sniffled again. "The thank you Dash." She wrapped him in the hug back. "Always, Izuku." Keigo was still getting used to Izuku's new freedom. He hadn't had a choice but to stay later today, though, and Izuku had been walking home okay, so he didn't see the harm. He trusted Izuku and he thinks Izuku trusts him. So, he allowed the paperwork to eat his afternoon, all the way to 9, when he headed home. It took only 10 minutes to get home, and he knew instantly Izuku wasn't home. It wasn't that the boy was particularly noisy. In fact, a trait he still carried was the deathly silence unless he was causing trouble, but there was an emptiness. No lights were on, but he wasn't expecting any to be. Izuku was more like a ghost than anything. It was unsurprising the boy refrained from any unnecessarily expenses, left no extra debts for him to pay. Or, as the probable truth, stayed out the way. Unless he was causing trouble. Keigo sighed, setting his things down on the kitchen counter and moving to the fridge. Izuku still had 30-odd minutes to get home. His eyes skipped over the leftovers, hoping Izuku had opted for ordering in, and grabbed the box of nuggets. It felt odd as he flopped onto the sofa, eyes drifting over the other side. The cushions were placed a certain way, not touched by anyone but Izuku. They respected each other's nests, even if it made the living room look a mess. He was rubbing off on the kid, so what? Plopping a nugget in his mouth, he swiped absently through his phone, responding to a message from Ijiro's aunt, planning another dinner, before letting his eyes glance back to the clock. It was 10:02 and Izuku wasn't home. He pushed down his anxiety, reasoning with himself. Chances are, he just lost track of time. He'd seen the kid do it plenty, especially when thinking. So, he ate another nugget, anxiously shoveling them into his mouth. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The fear reappeared as he looked at the caller ID, Izuku's social worker flashing across his screen. He took a deep breath, preparing to be told Izuku had run off, and praying he hadn't been found dead under a bridge, and answered, holding it to his ear. "Keigo Takami here." There was the faint sound of sniffing, and childish giggles in the back, before the woman spoke. She had a slight bounce in her voice, a kindness he recognized from the last time they'd spoke. Evening Takami, I'm sorry for such a late call. I just wanted to let you know Izuku is with me. His nerves weren't soothed. We ran into each other and he's helping me get my tots home. It's my fault if he's late before curfew. Keigo shook his head, blinking when he realized she couldn't see, and felt relief flood him. No, I'll come pick him up. Just send me your address and I'll be there in a few minutes. Izuku looked up from where he was, sat on the kitchen floor, inside a trailing circle of photos, with one child sat on his back, looking over his shoulder, and the other lying across his lap, and over Miss Naoma's shoulder as she opened the door. Stood outside, eyebrows slightly pinched in worry, was Keigo. The man saw his red-rimmed eyes and tears-stained cheeks, worry increasing. The social worker patted his arm, saying something Izuku couldn't hear, before smiling and inviting him. The hero shook his wings before stepping in. Mika pushed off his lap, startled, and snapped her gaze to Izuku. Your dad is Hawks? Careful not to flinch, Izuku nodded. Kinda. Mika pouted. Zoo. Why kinda? The adults were too far to hear. He's not my real dad. He's looking after me. Tom poked his cheek from his shoulder. But he hugs you when you're scared? At his nod, the twins left him, running to Hawks and jumping up and down. Although, his hero persona wasn't what piqued their interest. Instead, they pointed to Izuku. Thank you for hugging Izuku when he's scared. Keigo's eyes flicked to Izuku's, and a glare settled in his eyes. Don't even birdie dash, Mika clapped. Ah. Izuku. You can't be mean. Apologize. Izuku did, looking down and mumbling the sorry, and Mika grinned. Miss Noma chuckled as Keigo crouched, leveling to the twins. You two have to teach me that trick. They giggled, tapping their noses in secrecy, before running to Izuku and draping themselves over him. His attention wasn't on that, though, instead on a photograph he held in his fingers. He looked to the social worker. Where did you get this? She frowned, moving to look at it, before her eyes widening. That shouldn't, Mika, did you go through my office? The shied away, and she redirected her attention to the photograph. On it, a man and women were stood hand in hand, smiling brightly on the beach. Just to the side, sat under the umbrella with his knees pulled to his chest, a hoodie on, was 11-year-old Izuku. He wasn't quite smiling, but he wasn't scowling, gingerly running his fingers through the sand. Mrs. Hina gave it to me when you moved placements. She wanted me to give it to you and her number when you turned 18. She wanted to know they both are there if you need them. Izuku frowned, looking at the photo again. Can I keep it? She nodded, and Mika butted in to look. Why do you look like that? Izuku didn't look away. It was my first time to the beach. The twins looked sad, but before they could speak they were herded away, and Keigo moved towards Izuku. Come on then, Duckling, we should be getting home. Quietly, Izuku bowed to his social worker, thanking her, and left. The photo was still delicately in his hand. I'm thinking tomorrow we could go to the beach, maybe this time you'll move from under the umbrella. Izuku smiled weakly, liking his lips. I tried to run twice on that beach. Before we got there. I didn't want to go, wanted Inko to take me. I can't remember how I ended up there, but I stayed there the entire time. I didn't want anyone to see my scars. They didn't mind, got me water and ice so I wouldn't overheat. Izuku smiled. As it got later they took me closer to the water. No one else was there and they gave me space. I was good for most the day. From the moment we stepped on the beach till I woke up the next day. His smile fell, and Keigo stepped a little closer to him as they walked. I punched Mr. Hino and made them move my placement. I got too comfortable and dash. Keigo cut him off, wrapping him in a half hug. And they don't care. We'll give them a call, if you want. They're foster parents, they understand how kids can be. You were scared, and that's fine. Plus, now you've got me to hug you when you're scared. Izuku scowled at the taunt, shoving him away. Whatever, birdie. They both saw the smile. Izuku, rise and shine. Groaning, the kid dug his face into his pillow, scrunching his face to stop the light invading his eyelids. He mumbled an audible, go away, and Keigo laughed, tugging on the end of the blanket. Duckling, we gotta go. Izuku's hand snapped to the edge of his cover, fingers twisting in the material and staying tight as he pulled it up to his neck. Stupidly, he left his feet now uncovered. Nothing happened for a minute, and Izuku thought he'd won, wiggling his shoulders to sink further into the mattress, succumbing to the warmth of sleep once again. The light vanished, and his suspicion was further believed when he heard the door shut. Until there was a small scratch between his toes. His eyes burst open as a feather pinned his ankle to the bed, talons crazing between his toes and across the pad of his foot. A squeal left him as his body thrashed, flipping up to sitting and kicking with his other foot, trapped leg bending as flailed to push Keigo's body away. Stop. Stop it. He couldn't breathe as he began laughing, the giggle leaving him before he could SCK in air. Hysteria rose in him as he kicked and laughed more, joy and panic fighting each other for the front emotion. As he felt his bladder churn, the talon stopped, and he was left panting as he looked up at Keigo, who had an amused grin on his face. The feather released Izuku's ankle, and he crossed his legs quickly. Do not do that. Do what? Izuku pulled his feet closer to his body. That. Whatever that was. Keigo's eyebrows furrowed, voice dropping slightly. Tickling. Izuku shrugged. Tickling, torture. Whatever. Don't do it. Shaking it off, Keigo raised his hands and took a step back. I won't, for now. But come on, get ready and pack some clothes. That was the wrong phrasing of words, fear making Izuku's gut heavy, and his eyes snapped to Keigo defensively. Keigo was getting rid of him. There was no other reason he was being woken up at 4 in the morning, told to pack. He was being sent away. We've got to leave in 10 minutes if we're going to make it to the plane. His eyes widened in confusion, and Keigo laughed, placing a duffel bag beside him on the bed and ruffling his hair. Plane? Nodding, Keigo looked for any objection before going through his drawers, pulling out some tops and shorts. They were unused, tags still on, but he said nothing about it. Yes. We're going to my beach house. You can sleep on the way. School's closed for a week anyway. Izuku blinked, still wrapping his tired brain around everything, and responding with a yawned, huh? Keigo laughed, leaning against the wall at the end of the bed. We were going to do something this week anyway. Part of why I was home so late yesterday was because a villain hid there after hours and destroyed it. Izuku nodded, showing he had caught up. No one was hurt, luckily. Anyway, it's closed for a week. So we're going to the beach. Opening his mouth to say something, before closing it, Izuku liked his lips and furrowed his eyebrows, climbing over the duffel bag. You've got a beach house? Nodding, Keigo ruffled his hair once again and guided him to his clothes drawer. Yes, I do. Pick out some more clothes, limit the hoodies and jeans. It's too warm for those. I'll be back in 15 minutes. Izuku yawned, rubbing his eyes as he leant against Keigo, the plastic chair uncomfortable beneath him. He was too tired to care as he felt his eyelids get heavier, his foster dad's shoulder super comfortable all of a sudden. Don't sleep just yet, Duckling, the plane will be boarding soon enough. Grumbling under his breath, Izuku ignored him, and the second he felt his eyes close, his shoulder was being shook. Come on Izuku, just wait until we get on the plane. Izuku was in a half-daze as they passed boarding and got on the plane, first class of course, Keigo already lying their seats back and tucking a blanket around him, and he hadn't even clocked on as the captain spoke. But, when the plane began to move, his eyes snapped open and his body jerked slightly, panic making his heart plummet. Izuku, you okay? His clambered off his seat and into Keigo's lap, eyes clenched shut and tense. A hand rubbed up and down his back, wings coming up to surround him. First time on a plane, huh? Izuku nodded, a slight shake in his body. Okay, get some sleep. We'll be there before you know it. The beach house was big, bigger than the house. Much the same, it had one tall room with a hanging nest, a net ladder placed down like at home, so Izuku could get there, and a room just opposite that Izuku could stay in. A few more rooms for guests that went along one floor, including a few guest bathrooms and even a guest kitchen. On the bottom floor was the main kitchen, the back opening up the marble-floored pool, a split leading to a bar in the middle. There were deck chairs around and a glass fence surrounding the end of the balcony and showing off the ocean and beach. Private, should Izuku mention. It was hot, his breath slightly labored as he pulled at the collar of his hoodie, hair sticking to his forehead, damp with sweat. Keigo dropped their bags on the sofas, looking back at him with a smirk. I'll turn the aircon on, go change. Put on some swimming clothes too, we got a pool. Nodding, he grabbed his bag and wandered to his room. He was surprised he found it, the tour had been brief, and looked inside, leaning against the closed door. It was simple, a double bed in the center, a bookcase to one side and a wardrobe by the other. He'd never been on holiday, he'd never really left the city, never mind country. Sighing, he shook his head and dropped his bag, crouching to search through it. Keigo had done some last-minute shopping before coming to the beach house, letting Izuku sleep in the trolley, and brought some extra clothes. He had never been on holiday. Izuku was excited. Come on Duckling. No. Izuku twisted away slightly when Keigo splashed water at him, his voice firm. He wasn't moving, sat on the edge of the pool with his legs dipped in and idly swinging around was enough. The man pouted, wings flapping a little to push him forward. Okay, but don't waste the entire holiday sitting on the edge of the pool. Izuku scowled, mocking him before playing with the hem of his swimming shirt. It was black with blue seams, matching the color of his swimming trunks. It cut off at his elbows, not massively tight to his body but not as baggy as his usual clothes. It had been a bit startling to walk past a mirror and realized he had put weight on. The shorts went to his knees, and although he'd rather not have his legs out, the cold water on them was amazing. "I'm getting a drink," he huffed, pushing to standing and aiming for the kitchen. He wasn't so successful. As he turned, he misjudged the position of his foot and only his toes and a quarter of his foot on his back leg hovered over the floor. His body tensed at his sudden unbalance, weight pushing forward to try and save himself on his front leg, only for his knees to buckle and his body fall back. Panic shot through him as he scrambled, arms flailing to grab anything before he landed in the 6-foot water. His cry was cut off as he submerged, water filling his mouth quickly and oxygen flow cut off. He thrashed even more, only falling an inch or two before arms grasped his quickly sinking body and pulled him up, sitting him back on the edge as he spluttered, catching his breath. Izuku hadn't realized his eyes were still closed until Keigo's hand was on his cheek. "It's okay, Duckling, it was just a little fall." It made sense, in Izuku's mind, why Keigo was immediately on to comforting. Given Izuku's track record, and the list of triggers they were still to find, any act of panic was expected at nearly anything. Opening his eyes slowly, vision bleary from the water, he took a deep shuddered breath and rubbed at them, hoping the tears weren't obvious. When Keigo's hand moved, HR grasped the wrist and held tight. "That's it, deep breath. Next time you want to go swimming, use the ladders, 'kay?" His voice was light, and Izuku nodded, swallowing thickly. His voice cut out. "I can't, I dash." Keigo's hand pushed his soaked hair from his forehead. "I see I can't swim." A silence passed for a minute, and Izuku pulled back, expecting to be scorned and laughed out. He wasn't sure why. Keigo had never before, but instead the hand moved to the back of his neck and their foreheads pressed together. "Okay, that's the first job of this holiday." After a second, when Izuku nodded, he pulled back and tapped the kid's cheek. "First things first, go get your drink." Nodding again, Izuku scooted from the edge and stood, shaking himself on the towel placed outside the door before stepping in. The water was cold as it dripped from his hair and to the back of his neck, and he looked down to see the swimming top hanging tightly to his body, darkened by the water. Checking to make sure Keigo wasn't looking, he was on his phone, his hand reached back and over his top. He couldn't get far, but his fingers still brushed the small bump in the top, the scar slightly tingly beneath. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself Keigo had seen them, he knew about them, and he didn't care. Keigo was good. Keigo was going to teach him how to swim. Kick. Kick. That's it. Arms too. Keigo grinned, watching the not-so-coordinated thrashing boy pace the pool. As hands scrabbled to grab the end, Izuku burst to standing, raising his arms victoriously and shaking his hair out. "I made it. I swam a whole length. Did you see?" Keigo hadn't seen this side of Izuku. His smile was overbearing, spreading over his face and making him look younger than 12, and it was refreshing. He had had the world's share of trauma, and to see him simply happy made his wings flutter. Keigo didn't think that if that was him, he'd smile again. "Well done, Duckling. Reckon you could swim back?" Grinning rather smugly, Izuku nodded, sloppily diving and thrashing his way back. Keigo reckoned after a few more days' practice, he'd get it. The boy was a fast learner, on most occasions. He placed his hands on Izuku's shoulders as the splashing got to him, stopping the headbutt to his abdominal, and stabilizing him as he once again burst up in excitement. His hands clasped onto Keigo's, eyes wide and smile once again wide. "Did you see, Dad? Did you see? Thank you. Thank you." Before Izuku could register and Keigo could recover, he had dove back down and swam the length the other way. Keigo could only half watch, making sure he wouldn't drown, as his mind flipped a million miles a second. Izuku had called him Dad. Izuku had called him Dad. Dad. He blinked back to life when Izuku cheered again, and smiled, clapping loudly. "Well done, Duckling, keep at it, I'm going for a drink." Izuku nodded, half listening as he continued to lap. Keigo climbed out, shaking his wings dry, and heading to the open kitchen. He exhaled his shaky breath once out of sight, clutching the kitchen side, and grinned. Tears specked his eyes, feathers ruffling, as he smiled. Izuku called him Dad, had actually called him Dad. He had classed the kid as his son, saw him as his duckling, but he hadn't expected the boy to view his as a father. A pain, a landlord, a brother possible. But not Dad. Turning around to see Izuku bursting from the water once again, still blissfully unaware of what he had said, made him give a small laugh. Yeah, Izuku was his kid. "Hey, Izuku, ready for dash." He was cut off by the doorbell, Izuku tensing slightly. Keigo's smirk got bigger. Izuku hated Keigo. He kept his glare on the man as they sat around the table, pushing his food around the plate as the chatter got louder and louder. It was strange, he wasn't used to so much noise. And so, his nervousness was hastily covered by annoyance. Annoyance at the fact there was an extra 6 people sat around the table. Don't be so grumpy. A heavy arm settled over his shoulders, Ichiro leaning heavily against him. He wasn't speaking to Izuku, but in fact Hitoshi sat on his other side. Him, like his dad, were sullen, whilst his pop, coincidentally, the one with a loud quirk, and both Mrs. Kirishima spoke boldly and loudly with Keigo. Hitoshi and Ichiro had met before, occasionally, and understood each's personality. Izuku wasn't sure if Hitoshi liked Ichiro, but he knew the redhead liked everyone. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. I'm not being grumpy. Mr. You're all ruining my holiday is. Ichiro hummed, ruffling Izuku's hair. They were all in their swimsuits, sat around the table outside, and Izuku was more soaked from the boys' antics than when he was swimming himself. Both pairs of eyes were on him. He's got a point, dude, you're grumpy as heck. There was a half-yelled language from someone on the table, but it was ignored. Izuku shrugged them off. You're both annoying. Izuku's back tensed when he heard a vacant clink of alcohol bottles. When he looked up to see Hisashi passing out beers, his stomach plummeted. It wasn't the drunk itself, in fact, a part of him yearned to have it, but it was the brand. The same design as the one that had once marred his skin. The skin beneath his right rib twitched and burned. He took a deep breath, making eye contact with Keigo, who tilted his head. The message was clear, and Izuku nodded, looking down. Keigo didn't need to know. Right. Kiddos, off to the pool. Us grown-ups are drinking. Izuku's eyes snapped up again, and Keigo winked, pulling the label off the drinks as he went. Izuku didn't get time to question, Ichiro already dragging him from the seat and to the pool. He smiled slightly, removing it in time to be pushed into the shallow water by Hitoshi. He scowled, grabbing the laughing boy's ankle and launching him in right behind, Ichiro cannonballing in with a louder yell. Izuku found his previous worry dissipating as he was splashed at and as he shoved water at them. Slowly, the smile spread back over his face, and he grinned at Ichiro, grabbing a glass that had been discarded and filling it with water, before holding it behind his back. Keigo was talking with Shoyuta, laughing with his parents, and not seeing Izuku. He shared a look with Shoyuta as the man rubbed his eyes, the man looking away as Izuku climbed up onto the table, higher than Keigo, and dumped the water on his head. Silence fell across the group, Keigo turning slowly. You're in big trouble, Duckling. Grinning, Izuku crossed his arms. Oh yeah? He squealed when feathers shot at him, everyone bursting out laughing. He ducked behind Hisashi, smiling awkwardly up at the hero. Help? Laughing, Hisashi shook his head. Sorry little listener, gotta help my son over my grandson. And Izuku was sacrificed. The realization hit Izuku like a train, in the middle of the night as he tossed and turned, the heat preventing his sleep. He had been close, the moment when the darkness of your closed eyes got a little fuzzy, when the thought popped into his head. He had called Keigo dad. The breath rushed out of him as he was through into sitting position, hands gripping the hoodie, Keigo's, he slept in, eyes wide and stomach twisting. It made his mouth dry, throat aching as though he hadn't drank anything. He had called Keigo dad. The man who had fostered him, taken all his shit in stride without looking back. Who dragged him home the first time he ran away, who picked him the final. Who'd forced him to go to therapy, who'd opened up his bed after a feverish nightmare. Who'd been there when Izuku first saw Inko, and who'd taken him home when she had made it clear. He had called Keigo dad. He flopped back on the bed, pulling the covers tight over him and groaned. The hero had made no indication of hearing, but he knew he did. He had a keen sense of hearing, and Izuku hadn't exactly been quiet. He had called Keigo dad. Keigo had been a parental figure to him, he thought so at least. He wasn't sure what one looked like, his examples had never been great. But Keigo was like Mrs. Kirishima and like Shoyuta and Hisashi, like all the parents in movies. He cooked and cleaned and cared for Izuku, even when he was being stupid. Guarded. Keigo hadn't cared when Izuku had punched him, nor when he got into fights. He hadn't punished Izuku, hadn't beaten him, hadn't yelled or screamed or. He had called Keigo dad. His thoughts were interrupted by a light knocking on the door, and sat up in time for it to open. As though manifested, Keigo stood there, smiling almost sheepishly. It morphed into a grin. I didn't wake you, did I? Shaking his head, Izuku crossed his arms over his knees and looked to the side. No, it was hot. Sighing in relief, Keigo leant against the door. You tired or have you got a minute? Izuku had effed up. He had called Keigo dad and now he was being sent away. The thoughts made his body heavy as he stood, nodding and following Keigo as he was led through the holiday home, absently chewing on the inside of his cheek. He had messed up, stepped too far. Had broken Keigo's kindness. The man had only pretended during the dinner, waiting for the guests to go to bed before breaking the news to Izuku. He'd be shipped off before morning, with nothing but a note to his name. Mrs. Noma would be waiting at the airport with a frown and 2 police, transporting him straight to juvie where he'd rot before being dumped in prison. A quirkless boy like him, no matter how tough and rough he'd shaped himself, stood no chance. He'd be dead before the end of his first day. He froze when he stepped into the kitchen. Keigo stood in front of the island table. It had a soft glow, the scent of the sea just down the road making his panic vanish. There was a few balloons floating, 13, printed on them in obnoxious fonts. There were a few wrapped boxes stacked, a mix of glittery green with white ribbons. One even had a red feather tucked in. In the middle was a cake, a simple sponge with white icing, happy birthday, in green, candles circling it. 13 candles. Izuku frowned, looking around. What's the date? Keigo gave a laugh, arms slightly crossed as he grinned. July 15th, well, it's still an hour away in Japan but I won't tell if you don't. Izuku's eyes widened slightly wider at the realization it was his birthday. And Keigo had remembered. His knees buckled as he crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks as he openly sobbed. Keigo was by his side in a second. Hey, it's okay Duckling. Izuku gave a small laugh, rubbing his cheeks. So sorry, I didn't think you'd remember. Keigo ruffled his hair, pulling him into a hug, in which Izuku returned. Of course I'd remember, I thought it would be nice for us to do a little celebration as the 2 of us. You can go back to bed if It was Izuku's turn to cut him off, hugging tighter. Thank you. Patting his head, Keigo smiled. It's okay. Now go on, blow out your candles before something catches fire. Laughing wetly, Izuku quickly dried his face with the supplied tissues before going to the cake, looking back at Keigo. I just blow them? By now, it was no secret that there were a few things Izuku didn't know, and Keigo had gotten pretty good at hiding his shock. It took all his training to restrain it this time, instead nodding encouragingly. Yep. One big blow. Like a child, well, he was a child. Izuku took an exaggerated breath in, before a harsh one out. The candles wobbled before going out, and a grin spread over Izuku's face, taking over the features. I did it. Ruffling his hair again, Keigo nodded and cut 2 slices, handing him one. This doesn't happen every time there's a birthday, got it? Giggling, Izuku nodded and took a big bite. Keigo grabbed the envelope, a feather attached, and held it out. You can open the rest of your presents later, but I'll allow you to open this one. Izuku took it slowly, opening it and unfolding it even slower. Keigo took a nervous breath. You called me Dad earlier, and there's no rush, but I thought we should make it official. Those are adoption papers. I've already signed them, you've got to sign and then it will be legal. Only if you want Dad. Izuku cut off Keigo's nervous rant, a smile breaking his face and tears falling from his eyes. He nodded. The word in itself was enough on a confirmation, and Keigo moved quickly, tackling him in a hug. I like how that sounds, Duckling. The end.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.